Chapter 421. Exchange Program 6. The morning after her breakthrough with the Infinite Horizon technique, Seola found herself waiting at the east entrance of Starcrest Academy. The sun had just begun its ascent, painting the sky in hues of amber and gold that reflected off the polished stone of the Academy's towering spires. She stood with perfect posture, hands clasped behind her back, golden eyes scanning the path for any sign of Arthur. She had spoken with her father last night about her progress. The conversation had been brief but momentous. Moyong Jong rarely showed emotion, but the slight widening of his eyes had spoken volumes. A grade 6 art for their family. The implications were profound, and they both knew it. "You're early." Seola turned to find Arthur approaching, his movements silent and efficient as always. He wore a simple training outfit, but there was nothing simple about the way he carried himself, like a blade sheathed but ever ready. "So are you," she replied evenly. "I thought I'd show you Starcrest properly. You helped me yesterday. Consider this repayment." Arthur smiled, one of those small, measured expressions that never quite reached his eyes. "I hardly did anything. You showed me what was possible," Seola said with uncharacteristic directness. "That's not nothing." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. Rather, it carried a sense of mutual assessment, two swordmasters recognizing something in each other that few others would understand. "Well then," Arthur said at last, "lead on." Starcrest Academy sprawled across the eastern mountain range like a city unto itself, ancient structures blending seamlessly with modern architecture. Unlike Mythos Academy with its uniform design philosophy, Starcrest had evolved organically over centuries, each generation adding its mark while preserving what came before. The academy is divided into 7 major sections, Seola explained as they walked along a stone pathway flanked by cherry trees. Most visitors only see the central campus and mistake it for the entirety of Starcrest. "And the real Starcrest lies deeper," Arthur observed. Seola nodded, pleased by his perception. The central campus houses administrative facilities and general education classrooms. Beyond that, she gestured toward a series of interconnected buildings with distinctly traditional Eastern architecture, lie the specialized training grounds. They passed through an archway adorned with carvings of swords and spears, entering a vast courtyard where dozens of students practiced various martial forms. Unlike at Mythos, where training was often conducted with a certain performative flair, here the atmosphere was intensely focused. No wasted movements, no flashy displays, just the disciplined pursuit of mastery. "Impressive," Arthur commented, his eyes tracking a young man moving through a complex series of strikes. "Your standard curriculum is more advanced than Mythos's specialized tracks." "The East values foundation," Seola replied simply. "Without roots, a tree cannot grow tall." They continued walking, passing through gardens where students meditated among carefully arranged stones and flowing water. Seola explained how mental cultivation was considered equally important to physical training at Starcrest, a philosophy that had endured since the Academy's founding. "And this," she said as they arrived at an expansive pavilion built on the edge of a cliff, "is where elemental arts are practiced." The pavilion offered a breathtaking view of the mountains and the valley below. Students stood at various points along its edge, channeling mana into elemental manifestations that dissipated harmlessly into the open air. "Gives new meaning to throwing fire into the void," Arthur remarked with a hint of amusement. "Safety first," Seola replied, the ghost of a smile on her lips. "We had an incident 50 years ago when 2 fire users decided to duel in the central courtyard. 3 buildings needed to be rebuilt." Arthur's eyebrow raised slightly. "Only 3. The architect designed Starcrest with student mishaps in mind," Seola said. "Most of the structures can withstand significant damage." They paused to watch a young woman manipulating water into intricate shapes, her concentration evident in the furrow of her brow. The water flowed in patterns reminiscent of calligraphy, forming characters that dissolved back into formlessness. "Water calligraphy," Seola explained, "an ancient art adapted for mana practice. It teaches precision and control." "Beautiful," Arthur said, studying the technique with evident interest. And practical. No wasted resources, no permanent consequences for mistakes. Siola nodded. That's the essence of Eastern training philosophy. Practice should be sustainable, repeatable, and deliberate. As they continued their tour, Siola led Arthur to a section of the academy few outsiders ever saw, the historical archives housed in a building that predated the academy itself. This was once a temple, she explained as they entered the stone structure. Inside, the air was cool and still, scented with age and the subtle tang of preservation enchantments. Scrolls and books lined the walls, some displayed in glass cases, others stacked neatly on shelves that reached to the ceiling. The history of mana cultivation in the East, Arthur said, his voice appropriately hushed for their surroundings. Yes, some of these records date back to the first appearance of mana in our world. Siola moved to a particular case, gesturing to a scroll contained within. This documents the founding of the 5 great families. Arthur leaned closer, examining the ancient text with evident interest. Your family's history is here? The official version, Siola replied, a subtle inflection suggesting there might be more to the story. Arthur caught the nuance immediately. And the unofficial version? Siola considered him for a moment, weighing something in her mind. Then, with a slight nod of decision, she led him deeper into the archives, to a small alcove hidden behind a row of bookshelves. The first Moyong wasn't born to power, she said quietly, withdrawing a slender volume bound in faded blue cloth. He was a wanderer who found a sword abandoned on a battlefield, a sword that spoke to him. She opened the book carefully, revealing illustrations of a man holding a blade that seemed to shimmer with its own light. A sentient artifact? Arthur asked, his expression thoughtful. Perhaps. The accounts differ. Siola turned a page, revealing more illustrations. What we know is that he learned from the sword, and from that learning came our family's first techniques. Is the sword still in your family's possession? Siola's expression grew solemn. It was lost during the Blood Moon War 3 centuries ago. The search for it continues. Arthur nodded, understanding the weight such an artifact would carry for her family. Thank you for sharing this with me. Knowledge shared is knowledge strengthened, she replied, carefully returning the book to its place. Besides, you've given me something far more valuable. As they left the archives, the morning had fully blossomed into day. Students moved between buildings with purpose, the academy alive with activity. Siola led Arthur to a secluded garden where a small stream wound between carefully placed stones. This is where I come to think, she said, settling onto a bench beneath a maple tree. The sound of water helps clear the mind. Arthur sat beside her, his posture relaxed yet alert, a warrior even in repose. You've built something remarkable here, he said, his gaze taking in the academy grounds visible from their vantage point. Not me, Siola corrected. Generations before us. We're merely adding our thread to the tapestry. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the gentle murmur of the stream. May I ask you something? Siola said finally. Arthur turned to her, his azure eyes attentive. Of course. Your art, the hollow eclipse technique. It's not just technique, is it? There's emotion behind it. Arthur's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or respect for her insight. You're right, he said after a moment. The most powerful techniques aren't just about form or function. They're about channeling something deeper. What does hollow eclipse channel, then? Arthur was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Hunger, he said finally. The memory of starvation, not just physical but spiritual. The hollow feeling of wanting something beyond reach. Siola nodded slowly, understanding in her golden eyes. That explains its power. And its name. And your infinite horizon? Arthur asked. What does it channel? Freedom, Siola replied without hesitation. The yearning to break beyond limitations, to see what lies past the edge of the known world. A smile touched Arthur's lips, a genuine one this time. That suits you. Does it? Seola looked surprised. You've always seemed contained, Arthur observed, like someone holding themselves in check. But yesterday, when you were working on the technique, that containment fell away. You looked liberated. Seola considered this, turning his words over in her mind. The Moyong family has always valued discipline above all else, she said finally. Freedom isn't something we often discuss. Perhaps that's why your art needed it, Arthur suggested. Balance requires opposing forces. Seola nodded, thoughtful. I'll remember that as I develop the remaining movements. As the sun climbed higher, they continued their conversation, moving from martial philosophy to more practical matters. Training regimens, the differences between Eastern and Western approaches to mana cultivation, the particular challenges of the exchange program. Your father seemed pleased with your progress, Arthur noted. As pleased as he ever shows, Seola replied with a hint of dry humor. But yes, elevating our family's art to grade 6 has implications. Political ones, Arthur said, not a question. Everything in the East is political, Seola confirmed. Especially power. With a grade 6 art, we stand more firmly alongside the Kagu family and Mount Hua sect. Will this change things for you personally? Seola considered this. More responsibilities, certainly. Greater expectations. She paused, looking out over the academy grounds. But also more freedom, in a way. Having proven myself capable of this achievement, my father may be less directive about my future. The burden of talent, Arthur said with a knowing nod. One you understand well, Seola observed. Arthur didn't deny it. We're given gifts for a reason, he said instead. The question is whether we choose our purpose, or it chooses us. And which was it for you? Seola asked, her golden eyes studying him intently. Arthur's smile held something both sad and resolute. Let's just say it was a mutual agreement. Before Seola could pursue this cryptic answer, the distant sound of a bell reached them, a signal that morning classes were about to begin. I should go, Seola said, rising from the bench. I need to study. Arthur stood as well, inclining his head in a slight bow. Thank you for the tour, and the conversation. Thank you for helping me find the missing piece, she replied, returning the gesture with equal formality. Chapter 422. Windmere 1. After a week of training in Starcrest Academy, we were divided into groups of 3 and given missions in different towns and cities all over the eastern continent. I was grouped with Ava Peng and Cecilia Slatemark. Serial murders in a small town, huh? I scrolled through the mission details on my phone. Sounds fun, Cecilia murmured, her head resting comfortably on my shoulder. She'd been using me as a pillow for the past hour of our drive. Not that I was complaining. The familiar scent of her perfume, jasmine with a hint of something darker, was distracting in the best possible way. It's a small town, Ava said from across the self-driving car, tucking a strand of black hair behind her ear. Her posture was perfect as always, hands folded neatly in her lap, looking more like she was headed to a business meeting than a murder investigation. The mayor is the strongest person there, and he's only white rank. But a 6-star adventurer took this mission and... She paused, her dark eyes meeting mine. Didn't make it back. I whistled. That changes things. Ava muttered, eyes back on her tablet. We all should be concerned. The eastern continent isn't like the west. Towns here operate under different rules. She wasn't wrong. Unlike the unified government structure of the central continent where I'd grown up, the East was ruled by a patchwork of powerful families and martial sections. Towns like Windmere existed in the spaces between these territories, often neglected and left to fend for themselves. That's why adventurers were crucial, taking on jobs too dangerous for locals but not important enough for the major families to bother with. I still don't see why they'd send all 3 of us, I said, sliding my phone into my pocket. Even with a dead adventurer, this seems like overkill. No offense to either of you. Maybe they just wanted to give us some quality time together. Cecilia smiled, pressing herself closer against my side. Her fingers traced idle patterns on my thigh, a touch too high to be entirely innocent. It has been a whole week since we've had a proper mission together. Ava cleared her throat pointedly. The Academy is testing our teamwork. Integration rankers like us are rare, especially among students. They want to see how we function as a unit. Boring explanation, Cecilia sighed, but withdrew her wandering hand. But probably accurate. The car slowed as we approached a checkpoint at the edge of Windmere. 2 guards in mismatched uniforms stood beside a makeshift barrier, looking nervous even from a distance. "Showtime," I muttered, rolling down the window as we stopped. "ID check, gentlemen." The first guard approached cautiously, taking our Academy identification cards with visibly trembling hands. His eyes widened progressively as he read each one. "Slate mark Empire Princess?" he stammered when he reached Cecilia's. "That's me," Cecilia replied with a smile that could cut glass. "Problem. And no, Your Highness." He practically threw the IDs back at us. "And you must be the Peng family heiress?" he added, looking at Ava with equal trepidation. Ava simply nodded, her expression neutral. "Welcome to Windmere," the second guard blurted, hurriedly raising the barrier. "The mayor will be honored to receive such distinguished guests." As we drove through, I watched the guards in the rearview mirror. The moment they thought we were out of earshot, one grabbed a phone and started making a call. "Well, there goes our low profile," I said. Cecilia stretched beside me like a cat, completely unconcerned. Did we ever have one? 2 of the most prominent families in the Eastern continent, plus you, Mr. Arthur Nightingale. "Focus," Ava interrupted. "We're approaching the town center." Windmere looked like dozens of other small eastern towns I'd seen. Narrow streets lined with a mix of traditional architecture and newer, cheaply constructed buildings. People moved about their business, but something felt off. They walked with their heads down, conversations stopping whenever our car passed by. "Friendly place," Cecilia remarked. "Let's get something to eat first," I suggested as we pulled up to a small hotel in the town center. "I'm starving, and we can start asking questions." 20 minutes later, we were seated in a dim-sum restaurant across the street. The place was half-empty despite it being lunchtime, and our arrival had caused a noticeable hush in the already quiet atmosphere. "This town feels weird," I muttered, reaching for a steamed bun. "Dreadful," Cecilia agreed, somehow making the act of eating look elegant. She slipped her arm through mine, pressing closer than necessary. "Good thing I have you to protect me. I'm pretty sure you could level this whole place if you wanted to," I reminded her. Cecilia might play the pampered princess, but I knew her strength. She batted her eyelashes at me. "But it's so much more fun to have you do it." Ava ignored our banter, focused on her tea and the mission brief displayed on her tablet. 11 victims in the past 3 months. All men. She swiped through crime scene photos that would have made most people lose their appetite. No obvious connection between them except gender. "The last adventurer thought they were being chosen through gambling dens," Cecilia said, recalling the report. "That's what his final message said." I nodded. "But he was wrong." "Oh," Ava raised an eyebrow. "Do tell." "It's not the gambling dens," I explained, pulling out my phone to show them the data visualization I'd created. "It's the brothels." Ava's expression twisted in distaste. "What makes you so sure?" "Look at the Eastern continent, especially rural areas like this," I said. "It's conservative, traditional values, modest dress, especially for women." I nodded toward Ava and Cecilia. "Did you notice how men were staring at you both when we arrived? It's not just because you're beautiful, but also because of your clothes." Cecilia was wearing a form-fitting dress that would be considered tame in the capital but was practically scandalous here. Even Ava, in her more reserved blouse and pants, was dressed more modernly than the local women in their traditional attire. "So it's lust, then?" Cecilia murmured, leaning close enough that her breath tickled my ear. "Do you also like these freeing clothes on me, Arthur?" I almost choked on my tea. "I'm trying to solve murders here, Cecilia. You can do both, she purred, her hand finding my thigh under the table. That seems strange, Ava said, frowning at my theory. Her traditional Eastern upbringing was showing. Are men really like that? They can be, I said, gently removing Cecilia's wandering hand. Especially in places where people are kept under strict control. Someone's exploiting that tension, creating a brothel system that's being used to target victims. I think there's more to it, Cecilia said, suddenly serious. Conservative attitudes alone wouldn't drive men to that extreme. I nodded. Agreed. There's something deeper we're not seeing yet. A waiter approached our table, nearly spilling tea in his nervousness. Forgive me, honored guests, but the mayor has extended an invitation for dinner this evening. He wishes to discuss your investigation. How thoughtful, Cecilia replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Please tell him we'd be delighted. After the waiter scurried away, I leaned forward. Well, that was fast. Too fast, Ava agreed. Those guards must have called ahead. It doesn't matter, I said. We need to talk to him anyway. But first, let's split up and see what the locals have to say. Meet back at the hotel in 3 hours. Cecilia pouted. Split up? But we just got here. She traced a finger down my arm. I was hoping we could check into our room first. Maybe rest a bit before we start working. The way she said rest made it clear that rest was the last thing on her mind. Ava stood abruptly, cheeks slightly flushed. I'll take the eastern section of town. You two can handle the west. She gathered her things with efficient movements. Try to actually accomplish something before dinner. As she walked away, Cecilia giggled. I think we embarrass her. You embarrass her, I corrected, but couldn't help smiling. Come on, we really do have work to do. Fine, she sighed dramatically, but her eyes were alert and focused. The playful girlfriend act dropped slightly, revealing the shrewd princess underneath. But you're making this up to me later. Deal, I promised, helping her to her feet. Let's see what secrets Windmere is hiding. We spent the afternoon questioning locals, but the results were unsettling. No matter what we asked, the conversation inevitably turned to praise for the mayor. He was a pillar of strength, the kindest man, a true protector of the town. Even when our questions had nothing to do with him, people found ways to mention his virtues. It was almost like they were following a script. By the time we regrouped at the hotel, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across Windmere's quiet streets. Ava was already waiting in the lobby, her expression troubled. Let me guess, I said as we approached. Everyone loves the mayor? She nodded grimly. It's unnatural. I've never seen such uniform adoration. Fear, Cecilia corrected, dropping onto an ornate couch. That's not love in their eyes. They're terrified. I sat beside her, thinking through what we'd learned, and what we hadn't. There's something very wrong in this town, and I bet our dinner host is at the center of it. As if on cue, a black car pulled up outside the hotel, clearly sent to transport us to the mayor's residence. Well then, Cecilia stood and smoothed her dress, a dangerous smile playing on her lips. Let's not keep him waiting. Chapter 423. Windmere 2. The mayor's car was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to Windmere's otherwise modest appearance. Beside me, Cecilia had slipped back into princess mode, her posture perfect, face a mask of polite interest. Only the slight pressure of her thigh against mine betrayed her tension. This feels like a trap, Luna whispered in my mind, her Chilean presence stirring restlessly. Everything in this town feels like a trap, responded another voice, deeper and colder than Luna's melodic tones. Erebus, my lich, rarely spoke unless it involved death, his domain of expertise. You sense something? I asked him silently. Death lingers in this town, Erebus replied, his ancient voice sending a chill down my spine despite our years together. Not just recent. Years of it layer upon layer, like sediment on a riverbed. Great. Exactly what I needed to hear before dinner. We're approaching the mayor's residence, Ava announced, peering through the tinted windows. And it's not what I expected. She wasn't kidding. As we rounded a corner, the modest buildings of Windmere fell away, revealing a sprawling estate that would have looked more at home in the capital than in this backwater town. A high wall surrounded manicured gardens, and at the center stood a mansion that practically screamed wealth and power. "Well, someone's doing well for themselves," Cecilia murmured, eyebrow raised. "Public service must pay better in the East than I thought." The car pulled through ornate iron gates and followed a curved driveway to the front entrance, where a line of servants waited to greet us. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit stood at their center, his smile broad and welcoming. "That's our mayor," I guessed, noting the deference the others showed him. Quite the reception. The driver opened our door, and we stepped out into the cool evening air. Immediately, the mayor approached, bowing deeply. "Princess Cecilia of the Slatemark Empire, Lady Ava of the esteemed Peng family, and the renowned Arthur Nightingale," he greeted, his voice warm and practiced. "What an honor to welcome you to my humble home. I am Mayor Chun, at your service." Humble was the last word I'd used to describe this place, but I kept that thought to myself. "The honor is ours," Cecilia replied smoothly, every inch the diplomatic princess. "Thank you for your hospitality on such short notice. Please, follow me." Mayor Chun gestured toward the entrance. "Dinner is ready, and we have much to discuss about these terrible events plaguing our peaceful town." The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than its exterior. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, priceless art on every wall. Servants materialized at each turn, offering drinks and leading us through a series of opulent rooms until we reached a dining hall that could have seated 40, though it was set for just the 4 of us. "Please make yourselves comfortable," the mayor said, indicating our places at one end of the long table. "I've had my chef prepare some local specialties." The food, when it arrived, was exquisite, far beyond what I'd expect from a small-town kitchen. Course after course appeared. Delicate dumplings filled with rare mushrooms, perfectly seared meats, vegetables carved into intricate shapes. Throughout the meal, Mayor Chun kept up a stream of pleasant conversation, skillfully avoiding any substantial discussion of the murders. "Forgive me for being direct," Ava finally said during a pause between courses, "but we're here on official business. What can you tell us about these killings?" The mayor's smile faltered slightly before returning. Of course. Business before pleasure. I admire that, Miss Peng." He dabbed his lips with a napkin. "The situation is troubling. 11 good men lost in 3 months, each found drained of blood, with strange markings carved into their flesh." "Markings?" I prompted. That detail hadn't been in our briefing. "Yes, like some kind of ritual," he replied, his expression grave. "Our local doctor couldn't identify them. I had hoped the Adventurer Guild would send someone with knowledge of such things, but the first adventurer who took the case." He trailed off, shaking his head sadly. "He died," Cecilia finished bluntly. "Disappeared," the mayor corrected. "We never found his body. But given the circumstances," he sighed heavily, "we fear the worst." "Ask about the markings," Erebus urged. "I need to see them." "Do you have photographs of these markings?" I asked. The mayor nodded. "I prepared a file for you. You can take it when you leave." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "But I must warn you, this killer is unlike anything we've faced before. He strikes without warning, leaves no witnesses. My people are terrified." "And yet they speak so highly of you," Cecilia observed, her tone deceptively casual. "Everyone we talked to today couldn't praise you enough." Was that a flash of tension in the mayor's eyes? If so, it was gone in an instant, replaced by modest self-deprecation. "They're kind people," he said, "and in times of crisis they look to leadership. I've done my best to protect them, organizing patrols, implementing curfews. But I'm only a white ranker, against someone powerful enough to kill a 6-star adventurer." He spread his hands helplessly. "We'll need access to all your case files," I said, "and to speak with families of the victims." Of course, the mayor agreed readily. Whatever you need. My assistant will provide everything tomorrow morning. The rest of the dinner passed uneventfully. The mayor skillfully guided conversation to lighter topics, the history of Windmere, recent developments in the empire, even polite inquiries about our studies at the academy. By the time dessert arrived, I was more convinced than ever that Mayor Chun was hiding something behind his perfect host facade. As we prepared to leave, he handed me a thick folder. The case files, as promised, including the photographs. "Thank you," I replied, weighing the folder in my hand. "We'll be in touch tomorrow after we've reviewed these." The same silent driver returned us to our hotel. None of us spoke until we were safely inside the suite the mayor had arranged for us, a spacious accommodation with 2 bedrooms and a common area. Ava immediately began checking for listening devices while Cecilia collapsed dramatically onto a sofa. "Well, that was enlightening," she said, kicking off her shoes. "Our host is either the most generous public servant in the East or he's hiding something massive." "Definitely the latter," I agreed, opening the folder. I spread the crime scene photos across the coffee table and immediately wished I hadn't. The victims had been savagely mutilated, their bodies contorted in positions that no living person could achieve. And on each corpse, carved into the flesh with surgical precision, were symbols I didn't recognize. "Blood magic," Erebus whispered, his voice suddenly intense, "ancient and forbidden. These aren't just murders, they're sacrifices." "Red Chalice cult again?" I thought. I relayed this information to the others. Ava's expression grew grim, while Cecilia moved closer to examine the photos. "Sacrifices for what?" she asked. "Power," I replied, letting Erebus guide my understanding. "Each symbol draws out and preserves the victim's life force. These people weren't just killed, they were harvested." "By the mayor?" Ava asked, finishing her sweep of the room. "It seems clear." "Too clear," I countered. "He handed over these photos without hesitation. Either he's innocent or he's so confident we can't touch him that he doesn't care what we know," Cecilia finished. She leaned against me, all pretense of princess decorum gone now that we were alone. "So what's our next move?" I gathered the photos, my mind racing. "We need to verify his story, talk to the families, see if their accounts match the official reports. And we need to check out that brothel theory, see if there's a connection between the victims." "Split up again?" Ava suggested. "We can cover more ground." Cecilia immediately wrapped her arms around my waist. "I'm with Arthur this time. No arguments." Ava didn't look surprised. "Fine. I'll speak with the families. You two can investigate your brothel theory." Her tone made it clear what she thought of that plan. "Be careful," I warned her. "If the mayor is behind this, he'll be watching us." "I can handle myself," she replied with quiet confidence. We'd all seen Ava fight. Her calm demeanor hid a terrifying efficiency in battle. "We'll meet back here before dinner," I said. "Compare notes." After Ava retired to her room, Cecilia pulled me toward the suite's 2nd bedroom. "Now that business is settled," she purred, "I believe you owe me for making me sit through that tedious dinner." I laughed, following her into the room. "The food was good at least." "The company wasn't," she replied, pushing me onto the bed. All that fake concern and practiced charm. I wanted to stab him with my dinner knife. That would have been diplomatically challenging, I pointed out as she straddled my lap. "Worth it?" she whispered against my lips. "Besides, you would have protected me. That's what boyfriends are for, right?" Before I could answer, she kissed me deeply, effectively ending the conversation. But even as I lost myself in her embrace, part of my mind remained troubled. Erebus's warnings echoed in my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial about Windmere and its smiling mayor. Morning came too quickly. Cecilia was still asleep when I slipped out of bed, drawn to the case files I'd left in the common area. I spread the photos out again, focusing on the symbols carved into each victim. "You recognize these, don't you?" I silently asked Erebus. "Some," the Lich admitted. "They belong to a ritual older than me." a forbidden technique for drawing out and preserving life essence. But these are only fragments. The complete ritual would require many more sacrifices, arranged in a specific pattern. What's the end goal? Pressed. Power. Immortality. The usual pursuits of those who meddle with death. Erebus's tone was dismissive. But these markings are precise, professional. Whoever carved them knows exactly what they're doing. A sound from the doorway made me look up. Ava stood there, already dressed and ready for the day. "You're up early," she observed, joining me at the table. Her eyes narrowed at the photos. "Find anything new?" "Maybe," I said, organizing the photos chronologically. According to Erebus, these markings form part of a larger ritual. If we map the locations where the bodies were found, I pulled out a town map from the folder and began marking the discovery sites. As the pattern emerged, Ava's expression grew troubled. "It's a sigil," she said quietly, "centered on the mayor's mansion." "Exactly," I confirmed. "These murders aren't random. They're carefully planned, creating a massive array with the mayor's home at the focal point." "So he is behind it," Ava concluded. "Or someone's setting him up," I countered. "Either way, we need more information. Stick to the plan, you talk to the families, and Cecilia and I will check out the brothel angle." The door to the bedroom opened, and Cecilia emerged, wrapped in a silk robe. Her hair was tousled from sleep, but her eyes were alert and focused. "I heard talking," she said, moving to join us. "What did I miss?" I quickly brought her up to speed. She examined the map, frowning at the pattern we'd discovered. "So we're dealing with some kind of dark ritual," she summarized, "with the mayor's mansion at the center." She looked up at me, all trace of playfulness gone. "This just got a lot more dangerous, didn't it?" "Yeah," I agreed, thinking of the 6-star adventurer who hadn't returned. "But we still have the advantage of numbers and strength. As long as we stick together and watch each other's backs, we can handle this." Ava nodded firmly. "I'll meet you back here by sundown. If I'm not back by then, we'll come looking," I promised. "Same goes for us." As Ava left for her interviews, Cecilia disappeared to get dressed. I stood at the window, looking out over the seemingly peaceful town of Windmere. Somewhere beneath its quiet surface lurked a killer. Perhaps the mayor himself, perhaps someone else, harvesting lives for some dark purpose. Chapter 424. Windmere 3. Windmere looked different in daylight, less ominous, more pathetic. As Cecilia and I walked through the Eastern District, I couldn't help noticing the contrast between the townspeople's modest homes and the mayor's ostentatious mansion. Small gardens struggled for sunlight between tightly packed buildings. Children played in narrow alleys, their laughter cutting off abruptly when they spotted us. "They're scared of strangers," Cecilia observed, her fingers intertwined with mine. Despite the seriousness of our mission, she'd insisted on maintaining our couple facade. Not that I was complaining. Her hand felt warm against mine, a reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. "Not just strangers," I replied, watching a woman hurry inside as we approached, slamming her door shut. "They're scared of everything." According to our intel, the brothel operated out of a nondescript building near the edge of town. Finding it proved challenging. Nobody was willing to give us directions, and the few who acknowledged our questions quickly changed the subject to praise the mayor. "This is getting us nowhere," Cecilia sighed after yet another unproductive conversation. "Let's try something else." She released my hand and approached a group of young men loitering near a small convenience store. I watched in amusement as she transformed before my eyes, her posture softening, her expression becoming more vulnerable. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the picture of innocent confusion. "Excuse me," she called, her voice pitched higher than normal. "My boyfriend and I are a bit lost. We're looking for, entertainment." She blushed prettily. "Something adventurous, you know? For both of us." The men exchanged glances. One of them, emboldened by Cecilia's apparent interest, stepped forward. "Not much entertainment in Windmere," he said cautiously. But, if you're looking for something private, there's a place past the old factory. Red light above the door. Thanks, Cecilia beamed at him. You're a lifesaver. She rejoined me, her princess persona snapping back into place like armor. Men are so predictable, she murmured, taking my hand again. Always eager to help a damsel in distress, especially when they think it might lead to something interesting. You're terrifying, you know that? I told her admiringly. MHM, she agreed, looking pleased with herself. That's why you love me. We found the old factory easily enough. An abandoned building with boarded windows and faded warnings about trespassing. Beyond it stood a row of shabby two-story structures, most appearing vacant except for one with a dim red bulb hanging above its unmarked door. That's our place? I said, feeling Luna stir anxiously in my mind. What is it? Cecilia asked, noticing my expression. I explained. Something's not right about this place. She squeezed my hand. We knew that already. The question is, what are we going to do about it? I considered our options. I should go in alone. You'd attract too much attention. Not happening, she replied flatly. We stick together. Cecilia, I sighed. I need you to trust me on this. If I go in as a customer, I can ask questions without raising suspicion. If we go in together, everyone will clam up immediately. She frowned, clearly unhappy with my logic despite its soundness. Fine, she finally conceded. But I'm waiting right outside. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, I'm coming in. And Arthur, her eyes narrowed. Don't you dare enjoy yourself in there. I couldn't help laughing. I'm investigating ritual murders, not looking for a good time. Just making sure we're clear, she sniffed, but I caught her slight smile. Go on then. I'll be watching. With a quick kiss to reassure her, I approached the brothel alone. The door opened easily, revealing a dimly lit interior that smelled of cheap incense and cheaper liquor. Men sat scattered around small tables, none making eye contact with each other or acknowledging my entrance. A makeshift bar occupied one wall, tended by a middle-aged woman with sharp, watchful eyes. I made my way to the bar, ordering a whiskey I had no intention of drinking. The bartender poured without comment, but her gaze lingered on me a second too long. She'd seen my type before, not here for the advertised services. New in town? She finally asked, voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. Passing through, I replied, sliding payment across the counter. Heard this place was interesting. She snorted. Nothing's interesting in Windmere. I took a sip of the whiskey, suppressing a grimace at its quality. That's not what I heard. Heard there have been some issues lately. Her expression shuddered. Don't know what you're talking about. She's afraid, Luna observed in my mind. With good reason, Erebus added. Death has touched this place recently. I glanced toward the back of the room, where a few women stood in the shadows. One caught my attention. She held herself differently, back straight, eyes alert, while the others seemed to recede into the darkness. Something about her presence commanded attention. Our eyes met across the room. After a moment of silent assessment, she nodded slightly toward a hallway. Taking the invitation, I left my untouched drink and followed her up a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. The room she led me to was small and sparsely furnished, with a single bed against one wall and a chair in the corner. She closed the door and gestured to the chair, taking a seat herself as far from the bed as possible. I didn't come here for what you're thinking, I said, keeping my voice low. Her mouth quirked up slightly. Nobody ever says they did. Her voice was steady, with an unexpected depth to it. So what do you want? Information, I replied, leaning forward. About this town. About the mayor. About why people keep disappearing. Her face showed nothing, but I caught the slight tightening of her jaw. Who are you really? She asked, eyes narrowing. You're not from around here, that's obvious. My name is Arthur Nightingale. I'm from Mythos Academy. An adventurer? Skepticism colored her voice. The last one didn't make it out of Windmere. I'm aware, I said. That's partly why I'm here. She studied me for a long moment. You don't look like much, but there's something about you. She leaned forward slightly. You're not alone, are you? I saw you outside with that girl. My girlfriend, I said, which wasn't a lie. And we have another companion in town. 3 of you, she mused. Still won't be enough. Not against him. Against the mayor? She laughed. A harsh sound with no humor in it. The mayor is just a man. A cruel, powerful man, but still human. I'm talking about his enforcer. The one who handles problems. I pulled out a roll of cash and placed it on the small table between us. I want to know everything. And I pay well for useful information. She glanced at the money but didn't reach for it. Why should I risk my life talking to you? Because you want out, I guessed, watching her reaction. You're trapped here like everyone else. But you haven't given up hope yet. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I had read her so well. She looked away, toward the single window with its grimy curtain. How long have you been in Windmere? I asked, keeping my voice gentle. 3 years, she replied after a moment. Came here looking for work. Couldn't afford to leave once I realized what kind of place it was. She turned back to me. They don't tell you the rules when you arrive. You figure them out after it's too late. What rules? She sighed, seeming to come to a decision. Fine. But understand this, Windmere has rules. Unspoken ones. Break them, and you don't get a second chance. I nodded, encouraging her to continue. The mayor, she began, voice dropping even lower, has this arrangement. Every man in town has to offer their wife to him for a night. Once a year. It's his sick way of showing who's really in charge. I kept my expression neutral despite the anger bubbling up. And everyone just goes along with this? What choice do they have? She asked bitterly. Those who refuse disappear. Their wives become widows overnight. Their children fatherless. And everyone knows why. Chapter 425. Windmere 4. How long has this been happening? Decades, from what I've heard. The mayor's been in power longer than anyone can remember. She leaned closer, lowering her voice further. These men who disappear, I said carefully. What happens to them exactly? She hesitated, conflict visible on her face. I shouldn't know this. Nobody's supposed to know. Another pause. But I saw something once. Something I wasn't meant to see. I waited, giving her time. Sometimes silence was the best prompt. It was about a year ago, she finally continued. A man refused the mayor's demand. Simon Wheeler, a shopkeeper. Good man, kind to everyone. He said no. Said he wouldn't let the mayor touch his wife. The next night, I was coming back late, taking a shortcut through the woods behind the mayor's mansion. She wrapped her arms around herself as if suddenly cold. I heard screaming, followed the sound to a clearing where I could see into one of the mansion's lower rooms through a window. Simon was there, strapped to some kind of table. The mayor was standing over him with a knife, carving things into his skin, symbols all over his body. Markings? Like a ritual? I prompted when she fell silent. She nodded. The mayor was chanting something. I couldn't hear the words, but she shuddered. The air felt wrong, heavy. And then there was someone else in the room, a tall man in dark clothes. He just appeared, like he stepped out of the shadows themselves. The mayor handed him the knife. And then, she trailed off, unable or unwilling to describe what came next. This man in dark clothes, I said. The enforcer you mentioned earlier? Yes, she whispered. He's not normal. Moves too fast, too quiet. Some people say he's not even human anymore, that the mayor's rituals turned him into something else. And these rituals happen regularly? Every few months. Always after someone disappears. She met my gaze directly. 11 men in the past 3 months. More than usual. That matched our information exactly. Why the increase? Don't know, she admitted. But the mayor's been more on edge lately. Stricter about his rules. It's like he's rushing toward something. Completing a larger ritual, Erebus suggested. The individual sacrifices forming a pattern. Has anyone tried to fight back? I asked. Or escape? A few brave fools, she said, her voice tinged with something like respect. Men who tried to stand up to protect their families. They're all gone now.
No bodies, no goodbyes.
Just gone. She studied my face. The adventurer they sent before you, he asked the same questions. Started putting it together. Then one night, he went out and never came back. What happened to him? Same thing that happens to everyone who crosses the mayor, she said with finality. His pet monster got him. I absorbed this, feeling the weight of it settle in my chest. This wasn't just corrupt leadership. This was systematic terror, maintained through violence and fear. And you? I asked. Why stay in a place like this? Someone smart enough to see what's happening should be smart enough to leave. She met my gaze, and for a moment, I saw through the carefully constructed walls to the person beneath. Someone who had once dreamed of something better. Where would I go? She said softly. This town traps you, makes you believe there's nowhere else. And after a while, you start to think maybe that's true. She hesitated. And there's something else. Something I haven't told anyone. I leaned forward. What is it? The mayor. He monitors everything. Every phone, every computer in Windmere. There are cameras hidden all over town. Nothing happens that he doesn't know about. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Including this conversation. A chill ran down my spine. He's watching us now? She nodded slightly. Probably. He has ways of knowing when people talk about him. That's why I never considered leaving. He'd know, and he'd send his enforcer after me. Then you need to get out now, I said, adding more money to the pile on the table. Take this. Go to Azure Grove City and find the Starcrest Academy office there. Tell them Arthur Nightingale sent you. They'll help you start over. She stared at the money, temptation warring with fear in her eyes. It's not that simple. Nobody just leaves Windmere. You will, I assured her. My girlfriend is waiting outside. She's an integration ranker like me. She can help get you safely out of town while I deal with the mayor's enforcer when he comes. And he will come, if you're right about being monitored. Hope flickered across her face, quickly suppressed. You don't understand what you're up against. I do, I replied calmly. An integration rank enforcer using forbidden death magic, serving a mayor who extends his life through ritual sacrifice. I stood up. It ends tonight. She rose as well, uncertainty in every movement. You really think you can stop him? After all this time? Yes, I said simply. But first, let's get you somewhere safe. As we prepared to leave, she caught my arm. Wait, there's one more thing you should know. Her voice was barely audible. The tattoo. What tattoo? The mayor has one on his wrist. A red sun with strange lines around it. The enforcer has the same mark. I've seen it when their sleeves pull up. The mark of the covenant, Erebus whispered in my mind, suddenly alert. A binding sigil that connects master and servant. Thank you, I said, genuinely grateful for the information. That might be the key to stopping all this. We made our way downstairs, where the main room had grown quieter, an unnatural tension hanging in the air. The bartender's eyes widened when she saw us together, a warning in her gaze that I didn't need Luna's empathic senses to interpret. Outside, Cecilia straightened from where she'd been leaning against a wall, relief evident in her expression. It quickly shifted to curiosity when she saw I wasn't alone. Change of plans, I said before she could speak. We need to get her out of town immediately. The mayor will be sending someone for her. To her credit, Cecilia didn't waste time on questions. The hotel? She suggested. I shook my head. Too obvious. We need somewhere the mayor's people won't look. I know a place, the woman offered hesitantly. An abandoned hunting cabin in the woods west of town. It's where I go when I need space. Perfect, I decided. Cecilia, take her there and stay with her. I'll keep watch on the brothel. When the enforcer shows up, and he will, I'll deal with him. Cecilia's eyes narrowed. I don't like splitting up. Neither do I admitted. But I need to know she's safe, and there's no one I trust more than you to make that happen. The compliment softened her expression, though she still looked unhappy with the plan. Fine. But if you're not at the cabin by midnight, I'm coming looking for you. Deal, I agreed, knowing better than to argue. I gave her a quick kiss, then watched as the two women slipped away down a side alley. Once they were gone, I found a vantage point on a nearby rooftop, concealed from street level but with a clear view of the brothel's entrance. As the afternoon faded into evening, I settled in to wait, knowing it wouldn't be long before the mayor made his move. Be ready, Luna warned as the shadows lengthened. Someone approaches. Yes, Erebus confirmed, unusually cooperative with Luna. Death follows close behind him. I called Evolvus to my hand, the sword materializing from condensed mana. Its familiar weight was reassuring as I prepared for what was coming. The enforcer arrived just as twilight deepened into true night, a shadow separating from the darkness. Chapter 426. Windmere 5. The enforcer moved with practiced stealth, his power masked but palpable even at this distance. He was good, very good, at concealing his aura, but I could still sense the unmistakable resonance of an integration ranker. High integration rank, Luna observed in my mind. I activated Lucent Harmony, feeling the familiar sigils light up along my arms as perfect tranquility settled over me. All 9 elements of mana fell into perfect balance, enhancing my control and perception. With my high integration rank power flowing through me, I bent the ambient mana around my body, weaving it into a cloak that rendered me nearly invisible. The enforcer paused at the brothel entrance, head tilting slightly as if listening to some distant sound. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he'd sensed me despite my concealment. Then he pushed the door open and disappeared inside. I moved quickly, using the shadows as cover. Sliding through the door behind him, I followed at a distance as he made his way directly to the staircase, clearly familiar with the layout. The few remaining patrons inside studiously avoided looking in his direction, suddenly fascinated by their drinks or the floor, anything to avoid acknowledging the predator in their midst. At the top of the stairs, he paused outside the room where I'd spoken with the woman earlier. Drawing a blade that gleamed with an unnatural light, he kicked the door open in a single violent motion. I didn't waste time on subtlety. Launching forward, I brought Evolvus down in a sweeping strike aimed at disabling rather than killing. The enforcer sensed me at the last second, whirling with inhuman speed, his blade rising to meet mine. Our swords clashed with enough force to splinter the floorboards beneath us, the impact sending a shockwave through the narrow hallway. His eyes widened in shock. Clearly, he hadn't expected resistance, let alone from another integration ranker. Who? He began, but I didn't let him finish. I pressed my advantage, driving him back with a series of quick strikes. He was good, dangerously so, but I could tell I had the edge in both power and technique. He recovered quickly, adjusting his stance and counterattacking with a flurry of blows that would have overwhelmed a lesser opponent. I parried each strike, reading his movements with practiced ease, looking for an opening. I spun just in time to deflect a second attack. The enforcer had created a shadow clone while I was focused on his blade work. The duplicate dissolved under my counterstrike, but the distraction had given the real enforcer time to retreat down the stairs. I followed, staying close to prevent him from setting up another ambush. We burst into the main room of the brothel, now empty of customers. Only the bartender remained, pressed against the wall, eyes wide with terror. "You're making a mistake," the enforcer said, his voice surprisingly normal for someone who radiated such menace. "The mayor protects this town. You have no idea what you're interfering with." "I know exactly what I'm interfering with," I replied, Evolvus glowing brighter as I channeled more power into it. "A serial killer who sacrifices innocent people to extend his life." The enforcer's expression darkened. "Sacrifices are necessary. The mayor's work ensures the safety of everyone." Everyone except the people he murders, I countered, launching another attack. Our battle intensified, blades clashing with enough force to shatter the nearby tables. The enforcer was fully engaged now, no longer holding back. His aura flared darkly, pushing against mine as we fought for dominance. I needed to end this quickly. Activating Mythic Body, I felt strength surge through my muscles as my physical form enhanced beyond normal limits. Soul Vision followed immediately, the world slowing around me as my perception sharpened to supernatural levels. The enforcer's eyes widened as he felt the shift in my power. "What are you?" I didn't bother answering. Instead, I channeled more power through Evolvus, the blade glowing with intensified energy as the Seraphim's embrace activated, its ancient power sharpening my focus until I could read even the smallest twitch of his muscles, anticipating each move before he made it. The final exchange happened in the blink of an eye. He lunged forward with a desperate attack meant to impale me. I sidestepped, letting his blade pass harmlessly by my ribs, and brought Evolvus down in a perfect arc. The enforcer's sword shattered under the impact, and he crashed backward into the bar, sending bottles and glasses flying. He lay there, defeated, his dark aura flickering as he struggled to rise. I approached cautiously, Evolvus pointed at his throat. "Who are you working for?" He glared up at me, defiance warring with fear in his eyes. "You think the mayor is the real power here? He's just a servant, like me." "A servant to whom?" He laughed, a ragged sound that ended in a cough. "You'll find out soon enough. The ritual is almost complete." "What ritual?" I demanded, pushing the tip of Evolvus closer to his throat. "The one that's killing innocent people?" "Innocent." He spat the word. "Their fuel. Nothing more." Disgust rose in my throat. "For what purpose?" "You're too late to stop it," he said. "The mayor has everything he needs now. The final sacrifice happens tonight. The mayor's mansion. It had to be. I needed to get to Cecilia and Ava immediately. As I shifted my weight to step back, the enforcer made his move. With a surge of desperate energy, he slashed upward with a hidden dagger. I dodged, but not quite fast enough. The blade scored a shallow cut across my forearm. In that moment, I made my decision. This man had helped murder countless innocents. If he escaped, he would only continue serving his master. There would be more death, more suffering. With cold clarity, I drove Evolvus down through his chest. The blade pierced through dark armor, flesh, and bone with a sickening crunch. The enforcer's eyes widened, not in pain but in surprise, as if he hadn't believed I was capable of delivering the killing blow. "You don't understand what you've done," he gasped, blood bubbling from his lips. "He will come for you now." "Let him try," I replied, twisting the blade. The enforcer's body convulsed once, then went still. As the life faded from his eyes, I thought I saw something else there. Not fear or anger, but a fleeting moment of relief, as if death was a release he had been denied for too long. I withdrew Evolvus, watching as the enforcer's body slumped to the floor. Black blood pooled beneath him, hissing where it touched the wooden boards. The smell of it was wrong, metallic but also sulfurous, like something that had been corrupted from the inside out. The bartender remained pressed against the wall, trembling. "You killed him," she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and terror. "No one's ever. He was supposed to be untouchable." "Not anymore," I told her, wiping Evolvus clean before sheathing it. "Get out of town tonight if you can. Things are about to get dangerous." She nodded quickly, then fled through the back door without another word. I knelt beside the enforcer's body, searching for anything that might give me more information. In his pocket, I found a small metallic object, a key, etched with symbols that matched the ones I'd seen carved into the victims' bodies. I pocketed it, suspecting it might prove useful. "We need to move quickly," Erebus urged. "The ritual won't wait." I needed to find Cecilia and Ava immediately. Now that I'd killed the mayor's enforcer, there was no telling how he would respond. If the ritual was happening tonight, we needed to stop it before it was complete. I left the brothel through the front door, not bothering with stealth anymore. The streets of Windmere were deserted, as if the town itself was holding its breath. In the distance, I could see the mayor's mansion on the hill, windows glowing with an unnatural light. "Something's happening there tonight," Luna murmured. "Look at the guards." The mansion was surrounded by more security than I'd seen during our dinner visit. Men in dark uniforms patrolled the perimeter, and through the windows, I could see unusual activity. Servants rushing about, carrying strange objects I couldn't quite make out. "Ritual preparations," Erebus confirmed. "The pattern is nearly complete." I turned away, moving quickly toward the western woods where Cecilia and the woman were hiding. I needed to gather our team and formulate a plan before the mayor could complete whatever dark ceremony he was preparing. The hunting cabin was well hidden, nestled in a small clearing 2 miles from town. Without Luna's enhanced senses, I might have missed it entirely. A warm light glowed from its single window, and as I approached, the door opened to reveal Cecilia, Evolvus already in her hand. "Arthur." Relief washed over her face as she recognized me. She lowered her sword and pulled me inside, closing the door behind us. "What happened?" "You're bleeding." "Just a scratch," I assured her, glancing around the cabin's simple interior. The woman from the brothel sat at a small table, while to my surprise, Ava occupied a chair by the fireplace. "Ava, how did you find this place?" "Cecilia sent me a message," she explained. "After what I discovered today, I thought it best we regroup." "What did you find?" I asked, sitting down heavily on a wooden stool. The adrenaline of the fight was wearing off, leaving me aware of various minor injuries. Chapter 427. Windmere 6. The families of the victims all told the same story, Ava said, her expression grim. Their husbands stood up to the mayor in some way, refused his arrangement, questioned his authority, or tried to leave town. All disappeared without a trace. "No bodies were ever found," I noted, connecting this to what the woman had told me. "Because they're used in the ritual," Ava confirmed. "I spoke with an elderly man who's lived here his whole life. He showed me a journal his grandfather kept. Records of disappearances going back nearly 70 years, all following the same pattern." 70 years? Cecilia looked shocked. "The same ritual for that long?" "The journal mentioned that each mayor of Windmere has continued the tradition," Ava explained, her finger tracing lines in the old leather-bound book she'd brought with her. "Power passing from one to the next, along with the responsibility of maintaining what they call the barrier." "Barrier against what?" I asked, my interest piqued. Ava shook her head. "The journal doesn't say specifically, just vague references to keeping it contained and preventing the awakening. And now he's preparing for something big," I added, quickly filling them in on my confrontation with the enforcer and what I'd seen at the mansion. "He called it the awakening and mentioned a final sacrifice happening tonight." I placed the key I'd taken from the enforcer on the table. "I found this on his body. It might be important." The woman from the brothel made a small sound of distress when she saw it. I've seen that before. The mayor wears it around his neck when he performs the rituals." She reached out hesitantly, fingers stopping just short of touching the key. "It opens the chamber beneath the mansion. The ritual chamber. I only saw it once. Through the window, the walls were covered in symbols, like the ones carved on the victims." "Then it's too late," I said grimly. "If the ritual is already beginning." "It's never too late," Cecilia replied firmly, placing her hand over mine. Her touch was warm, grounding. 3 integration rankers should be more than enough to stop one white rank mayor, even without his enforcer. "You don't understand," the woman insisted. "The enforcer wasn't his only protection. There are others, creatures he's created through his rituals. I've seen them sometimes at night, patrolling the woods around his mansion." "What kind of creatures?" Ava asked, leaning forward. The woman's eyes darted nervously to the cabin's windows, as if afraid of being overheard. "They look almost human, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. Their movements are jerky, like puppets. And their eyes. She shuddered. No light in them at all. Zombies, Erebus whispered in my mind, his ancient voice unusually grave. I remembered encountering them in Vrindal City when we were attacked by the Umbervale Covenant. Did this mean they were responsible for this? But this was the Eastern continent. Cecilia's expression hardened as she deduced they were zombies as well, while Ava looked thoughtful, analyzing this new information. We didn't sense anything unusual during our dinner there, Cecilia pointed out, and I would have noticed creatures like that. Because he wanted to appear normal, I suggested. But now that the ritual is nearly complete, he's not bothering to hide anymore. Or perhaps they only emerge at night, Ava added. Many ritual constructs are sensitive to sunlight. Master, Erebus spoke suddenly in my mind, ask about the basement. Does the mansion have a basement? I asked the woman. Or some kind of underground chamber? She nodded slowly. Yes, that's where I saw him, performing the ritual on Simon, through a basement window. The entrance is hidden behind a bookcase in his study, I think. I never saw the door itself, but that's where he always went before the screaming started. A heavy silence fell over the cabin. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the trees with an eerie, mournful sound. The small fire in the hearth cast long, dancing shadows across the walls. Then that's where we'll find him tonight, I decided, standing up despite my fatigue. And that's where we'll end this. Cecilia moved to my side, her hand finding mine. You're exhausted. You need to rest before we go charging into another fight. Her eyes, normally so fierce, now held genuine concern. You killed the enforcer, Arthur. That's not something you just shake off. No time, I replied, though I appreciated her concern. If the enforcer was telling the truth, the ritual happens tonight. We need to stop it before it's complete. I agree with Arthur, Ava said, rising from her chair. But we need a plan. The mansion will be heavily guarded, and we don't know exactly what we're facing. I might be able to help with that, the woman offered hesitantly. I know a way into the mansion grounds that the guards don't patrol. That's how I was able to see what I saw that night. She moved to the table where Ava had spread out a rough map of Windmere. With a charcoal stick, she marked a winding path through the woods that bordered the mansion's western side. There's a small stream that runs under the wall here, she explained, her finger tapping a spot where the property's boundary met the forest. The culvert is just wide enough for a person to crawl through. The guards never check it. I think they don't even know it exists. It will lead you to the gardens, near the service entrance. For the next hour, we refined our strategy. Ava would create a diversion at the front gates, something big enough to draw attention but not so catastrophic as to trigger an immediate lockdown. Meanwhile, Cecilia and I would slip in through the culvert, locate the hidden entrance to the basement, and stop the ritual and deal with the mayor. But as Ava pointed out, things rarely went according to plan. If we get separated, she said, marking rally points on the map, we meet back here at the edge of the woods. If any of us aren't out by dawn, the others don't wait. They go for help. What are we really walking into? Cecilia asked quietly, joining me by the cabin's single window. This feels bigger than a corrupt mayor. It is, I admitted. The enforcer hinted that the mayor serves something else, something that's about to awaken through this ritual. Like what? A shadow seeker. Maybe, I said, though Erebus's troubled silence suggested something even worse. Whatever it is, we stop it tonight. I checked my weapons one last time. Evolvus at my hip, a silver dagger Ava had provided in my boot, a pouch of spell components secured to my belt. Cecilia was similarly equipped, her curved blade gleaming with freshly applied fire runes. Ava had prepared several explosive devices of her own design, small enough to hide in her palms but powerful enough to bring down a wall if needed. The moon was rising as we left the cabin, casting silver light over the silent forest. The woman stayed behind at our insistence. She'd helped enough already, and we wouldn't risk her life further. Good luck, she said softly as we departed. And, thank you. Whatever happens, Thank you for trying. Her words followed us into the night, a reminder of what was at stake. Not just our lives, but the freedom of an entire town that had suffered under the mayor's twisted rule for generations. Let's end this, I said to my companions as we moved through the moonlit forest toward the mansion on the hill. Tonight, Windmere breaks its chains. Chapter 428. Windmere 7. Night had fully descended on Windmere by the time we approached the mayor's mansion. Under the moonlight, the ornate building looked more like a fortress than a home, its windows glowing with an unnatural light that spilled onto the manicured grounds. Guards at all entrances, Ava murmured, crouching beside me in the shadows of the treeline. More than before. They're expecting us, Cecilia added, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Word of your fight with the enforcer must have spread. I nodded, studying the patrol patterns. At least a dozen guards circled the property, each moving with the practiced precision of trained security. Not a threat to integration rankers individually, but their numbers would slow us down. Remember the plan, I said quietly. Ava creates a distraction at the east gate. Cecilia and I slip in through the hidden path to the west. We find the mayor, end this nightmare. Ava checked her watch. It's almost midnight. Let's move before they strengthen their defenses even more. She nodded once, then disappeared into the darkness with silent efficiency. Cecilia and I moved in the opposite direction, following the path the woman from the brothel had described, a narrow game trail that wound through dense undergrowth toward the western side of the property. We reached the edge of the woods just as a massive explosion rocked the eastern gate. Flames licked skyward, and shouts of alarm echoed across the grounds. Guards abandoned their posts, rushing toward the chaos. That's our cue, I murmured, impressed as always by Ava's gift for destruction. Ready? Cecilia grinned, wild excitement dancing in her eyes. Born ready. She squeezed my hand quickly. Stay close to me, okay? We sprinted across the open lawn, staying low and fast. The mayor's study window was exactly where the woman had described. On the first floor, partially hidden by ornamental bushes, its curtains drawn but light visible from within. Cecilia kept watch while I worked the window latch, eventually resorting to a focused pulse of mana that shattered the lock. The window swung open, revealing a lavishly decorated office. Empty, thankfully. I slipped through the opening, helping Cecilia in after me. The office was immaculate, every book perfectly aligned on its shelf, every paper neatly stacked. The only sign of disorder was a half-empty glass of wine on the desk, as if its owner had been interrupted. Quite the control freak, Cecilia whispered, eyeing the obsessively organized room. Even his pens are arranged by size. Not surprising, considering how he runs this town, I replied, moving toward the door. The hallway beyond was silent, but I could hear muffled voices coming from somewhere deeper in the mansion. We moved cautiously through dimly lit corridors, past displays of wealth that seemed obscene compared to the modest homes of Windmere's citizens. Paintings that belonged in museums, sculptures that must have cost fortunes, all collected by a man who ruled through fear and ritual sacrifice. The voices grew louder as we approached what appeared to be the main hall. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to make out the words. Cannot be interrupted, the mayor was saying, his voice tight with anger. After all our work, all our sacrifices, we are too close to completion. Yes, sir, replied a voice I didn't recognize. The preparations are nearly complete. See that they are, the mayor snapped. I won't have some academy students interfering with plans decades in the making, and find out what happened to my enforcer. He should have returned by now. I glanced at Cecilia, who nodded grimly. No time for subtlety. I kicked the doors open, Evolvus blazing to life in my hand as we burst into the hall beyond. The scene before us was not what I expected. Rather than a ritual chamber or some den of horrors, we found ourselves in a grand entrance hall. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and a sweeping staircase led to the upper floors. The mayor stood at its base, dressed impeccably in a dark suit, surrounded by several robed figures who scattered at our sudden entrance. "Ah," the mayor said, his gaze darting past us to the doorway as if expecting someone else. "The heroes arrive. But where is the third member of your little band? And where is my enforcer?" "Your enforcer won't be joining us," I replied coldly, advancing with a Volvis raised. "It's over. Whatever you've been doing to this town, whatever rituals you've been performing, it ends tonight." A flicker of genuine shock crossed the mayor's face, quickly replaced by a cold rage. "You killed him? You actually managed to kill my enforcer?" "Save the speech," Cecilia cut in, her own sword gleaming in the chandelier light. "We know what you've been doing, forcing yourself on women, sacrificing men who resist, using their deaths to fuel your sick rituals." A flash of annoyance crossed the mayor's face. "Crude, but not entirely inaccurate, though you missed the larger purpose." His eyes narrowed. "And it seems I've underestimated you both." "Don't care," I replied. "Surrender now or this gets messy." The mayor's smile was thin and dangerous. "It was already messy the moment you killed my enforcer, but no matter. He was merely one tool of many." He raised his hand, and several guards emerged from side doors, weapons drawn. Not integration rankers, but still dangerous in numbers. At the same time, the mayor drew a long ceremonial dagger that gleamed with an unnatural light. "Your choice," I said, activating Lucent Harmony. The familiar sigils lit up along my arms as perfect tranquility settled over me. All 11 elements of mana fell into perfect balance, enhancing my control and perception. The guards attacked in unison, but they were no match for integration rankers. Cecilia and I moved in tandem, my sword and her magic cutting through their formation with devastating efficiency. Within moments, those who hadn't fallen were fleeing in terror. To my surprise, the mayor proved a more formidable opponent. Despite his supposed white rank status, he moved with the speed and precision of someone far more powerful, his dagger leaving trails of miasma as he wielded it with practiced skill. "A cultist," I noted, "an abnormal one to be exact." Cecilia engaged him directly, her spells forcing him onto the defensive. "You're stronger than you look, old man," she taunted, landing a crimson spell that bit into his side. "You have no idea," he replied, his voice suddenly deeper, resonating with power that hadn't been there before. I activated Mythic Body, feeling strength surge through my muscles as my physical form enhanced beyond normal limits. Soul Vision followed, the world slowing around me as my perception sharpened to supernatural levels. Together, Cecilia and I pressed our attack, driving the mayor back. But he was surprisingly resilient, evading our strikes with unnatural agility, his dagger flashing dangerously close to vital points. The Seraphim's Embrace activated, sharpening my focus until I could read even the smallest twitch of his muscles, anticipating each move before he made it. The floor beneath my feet trembled. The entire mansion seemed to shudder, as if responding to some great force beneath it. The mayor laughed, a sound devoid of humor or sanity. "Too late. The final phase has begun." Taking advantage of Cecilia's momentary distraction, he drew a dagger at her, scoring a cut across her shoulder. She hissed in pain but didn't falter, retaliating with a magic arrow that would have taken his head if he hadn't ducked at the last second. I circled around, trying to flank him. "Whatever you're planning, it won't work," I called, hoping to distract him from Cecilia. "Your enforcer is dead, and you're next." "My enforcer?" The mayor's smile was chilling. "He was nothing, a tool like the rest of them, replaceable." Our battle intensified as the mansion continued to shake around us. I could feel my energy draining, but I knew I couldn't relent. Not now. With a final surge of power, I drove a Volvis forward, my energy igniting as I released a powerful strike, knocking the dagger from the mayor's hand and forcing him back. He staggered, his guard broken, and in that instant, I struck, driving my blade forward and pinning him against his desk. The mayor's calm facade had shattered. His composed expression was gone, replaced by a look of panic and rage. He glanced at his wrist, pulling his sleeve down, but not before I caught sight of something. A tattoo, briefly visible under the cuff. It was a red sun, circled by dark lines that seemed almost alive, pulsing faintly with mana. Chapter 429. Red Sun 1. I stared at the red sun symbol on the mayor's wrist. The Southern Sea Sun Palace. Like discovering the villain in Chapter 3 of a mystery novel when you've read the entire book before, I knew exactly what this meant, though I had the distinct disadvantage of being the only one present with such foreknowledge. The Southern Sea Sun Palace occupied its own island in the Luthadel Sea, which stretched between the eastern and southern continents like a vast, watery no-man's land. It was the southern counterpart to the Northern Sea Ice Palace, which had its own island between the eastern and northern continents. Geographical symmetry that would have been poetic if it weren't for the troubling implications. While Mount Huasect maintained a certain aloofness from worldly affairs, their isolation was practically gregarious compared to the Southern Sea Sun Palace. The palace had effectively excised itself from the world in the latter part of the 19th century, creating a bubble of existence so separate that even mentioning them in most circles would earn you blank stares or dismissive laughs. They were the geopolitical equivalent of that distant relative no one talks about anymore, except this relative had access to extraordinary power and a legendary artifact. Arya, I called out, my voice cutting through the tense silence. You recognize this, right? Arya's eyes widened as they fixed on the symbol, her recognition immediate and visceral. Her usual composure slipped for a moment, and I could feel her fire mana simmering just beneath the surface of her control, threatening to ignite the very air around us. The red sun, she confirmed, her tone carrying the weight of centuries of familial grievance. If hatred could be distilled into sound, her voice would have been its purest expression. What is that? Cecilia asked, her crimson eyes narrowing with curiosity. Just some rats who ran away, Arya scoffed, the deliberate casualness of her words belied by the white-knuckled grip she maintained on her staff. But they show themselves again? We need to report this. Of course, I agreed, summoning Deep Dark from the well of shadows within me. The darkness materialized as sleek black chains that wrapped around the mayor with the eager precision of a spider securing its prey. We'll take him with us. The mayor, wisely, had decided that unconsciousness was the better part of valor and remained slumped in the chain's embrace. Why does she hate that so much? Cecilia whispered to me as we began our journey back, her voice low enough that only I could hear. Bad blood, I replied simply. The Gu family and the Southern Sea Sun Palace have very bad blood, though a long time has passed since then. What I didn't add was that in the novel, the Southern Sea Sun Palace had been used by the Red Chalice cult and vampires as a tool, a staging ground for horrors yet to come. By the time the Kagu family emissaries reached the island after the vampires revealed themselves, they found only ruins kept hidden from the world by the Red Sun artifact's power to block all external observation. Even now, satellites orbiting high above could see nothing of what transpired on that island. The Red Sun's power created a perfect blind spot in humanity's vigilance, a darkness hiding in plain sight. In terms of power, the Palace Lord should be immortal rank, I thought, the realization sending a chill down my spine despite the warm night air. The presence of the symbol here, connected to the miasma incidents, could only mean one thing. The corruption had begun. The mayor's involvement suggested the Palace Lord might already have become a cardinal of the Red Chalice cult, with who knew how many other powerful beings gathered on that isolated island. None of this boded well for, well, anyone, really. Our return journey to the Academy was mercifully uneventful. The Academy's night guard looked appropriately startled when we arrived at the gates with an unconscious town mayor wrapped in shadow chains. But to their credit, they maintained their professionalism. One doesn't work security at a place where teenagers routinely bend the laws of physics without developing a certain immunity to surprise. We need to see Professor Nero immediately, I said, my tone brooking no argument. The guards exchanged glances before one nodded and gestured for us to follow. He's in his office. Late-night research again. Professor Nero, unlike the guards, didn't even look up when we entered his office with our bound captive. He simply marked his place in the book he was reading and sighed with the weariness of someone who had long ago accepted that peace and quiet were luxuries beyond his reach. I assume there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for why you're dragging Windmere's mayor into my office at this hour? He asked, his gaze finally rising to meet ours. He's involved with the miasma incidents, Ava stated flatly. And worse. Show him, I prompted. Arya stepped forward, unceremoniously yanking up the mayor's sleeve to reveal the red sun symbol burned into his skin. The Southern Sea Sun Palace, she said, practically spitting the words. For perhaps the first time since I'd known him, Professor Nero looked genuinely shocked. His composure returned quickly, but that momentary crack in his calm facade spoke volumes about the seriousness of our discovery. I see, he said, his voice carefully controlled as he stood from his desk. This complicates matters. The next few hours passed in a blur of debriefings, explanations, and increasingly high-ranking academy officials being summoned from their beds. By dawn, we had repeated our account so many times that the words had lost all meaning, becoming simply sounds strung together in familiar patterns. The mayor had been taken to a secure holding facility, his unconscious form still bound in my shadows. Whatever information he held would be extracted, hopefully through questioning rather than more invasive means, though I had my doubts. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the academy grounds, Professor Nero gathered us in a quiet conference room, away from the continuing flurry of activity. You've done well, he said, his expression grave despite the praise. What you've uncovered may have far-reaching implications beyond Windmere. What happens now? Rachel asked, voicing the question we were all thinking. Nero's gaze swept across our faces, lingering on mine for just a moment longer than the others. The headmaster is in communication with Starcrest Academy and the various authorities. This situation requires closer investigation. We're going there, aren't we? I said quietly, the words more statement than question. Nero nodded slowly. A joint delegation is being organized. All 200 exchange students from both Mythos and Starcrest will be dispatched to the Southern Sea Sun Palace for a formal investigation. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. 200 students, sent to an isolated stronghold that might already be corrupted by forces beyond our understanding. It sounded less like a mission and more like the setup for a tragedy. But then, I'd always known this was coming. The pages of this particular story had been written long before I ever arrived on the scene. The only question now was whether I could change the ending before it was too late. When do we leave? Cecilia asked, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. Nero's reply was simple, definitive, and carried the weight of finality. Tomorrow. Chapter 430. Red Sun, 2. Magnus Dracar, the martial king, sat with the relaxed posture of someone who had long ago transcended concerns about proper meeting etiquette. The air around him seemed to vibrate faintly, as though reality itself recognized that it was in the presence of someone who could rearrange its fundamental laws if the mood struck him. So, did you confirm what Arthur said? Magnus asked, his deep voice filling the room with a quiet authority that made even the dust motes in the sunbeams seem to pause their dance. Moyong Zhong, standing by the window with his characteristic rigidity, let out a sigh that carried the weight of centuries of familial responsibility. The light streaming through the glass outlined his stern profile, casting half his face in shadow as if to emphasize the duality of the decision before them. Yes, it lines up perfectly with our intelligence, he confirmed, his fingers tapping a rhythm of agitation against his forearm. The Southern Sea Sun Palace is indeed connected to the miasma incidents across the border towns. If they're really stirring trouble on this scale, we need to address it before things spiral beyond containment. The question is, how many forces will we need to mobilize? Li Zenith, the lightning dragon of Mount Hua, looked up from the detailed maps spread across the table. His silver hair caught the light as he moved, creating the momentary illusion of an electrical discharge around his head. The Southern Sea Sun Palace has maintained absolute isolation for over a century, he said, his voice carrying the precise sharpness of a master swordsman. Their forces are an unknown quantity, but we must assume they've maintained at least some of their historical strength and whatever forces the cult behind them gives them. Which was considerable, added Nero Estrellan, his academic robes rustling as he leaned forward. Before their isolation, they were known to field at least a dozen ascendant rankers and potentially an immortal rank lord. My research suggests their numbers may have dwindled during isolation, but their quality likely remains formidable. Magnus leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips as he surveyed the concerned faces around him. Not to diminish the gravity of the situation, he said, but I think we're overestimating the mobilization needed. They've already got an immortal ranker and 3 ascendant rankers on their roster, professors no less. Throw in another immortal ranker and a few ascendant rankers for backup, and that's more than enough. Zhang folded his arms, a skeptical brow arched high enough to suggest it was attempting to escape his forehead entirely. You're not wrong in terms of raw power calculation, he conceded reluctantly, but that assumes they don't face anything unexpected. The Southern Sea Sun Palace was known for its cunning as much as its strength. Are you going to sit this one out? Magnus chuckled, the sound low and confident, like distant thunder promising a storm that would reshape landscapes. Not a chance. I didn't come all the way here to watch from the sidelines. Then why bother sending so many? Zhang pressed, his practical nature clearly wrestling with what seemed to him an unnecessary allocation of resources. You alone could probably wipe out the entire Southern Sea Sun Palace if it came to that. There's strategy in numbers, Lee Zenith said, tracing a finger along the island's coastline on the map. A distributed approach allows us to cover more ground in less time. The palace's island is vast, nearly 10,000 square kilometers of territory to search. Magnus' grin widened, the kind of grin that made people wonder if he was serious or simply baiting them into a false sense of security. And let's not forget, what if they've got a radiant ranker tucked away, hiding in the shadows? You never know. Zhang shot him a flat look that could have dried a rainforest. A radiant ranker? On that island? If they had one, the whole world would have heard by now. Radiant rankers aren't exactly known for their subtlety or restraint. His gaze flickered meaningfully toward Magnus as he said this. I'm hurt, Magnus replied, placing a hand over his heart in mock offense. I'm the very definition of restraint. You once redrew the coastline of the northern continent because someone insulted your sword technique. Nero reminded him dryly. It was a very good technique, Magnus defended, completely unrepentant. Lee suggested, a dual-purpose mission. Publicly, a cultural exchange. Privately, an investigation. It gives us flexibility and multiple avenues of approach. The composition of our forces needs to be carefully considered, Lee continued, his fingers drumming against the hilt of his sword, a habit he had never quite broken. I suggest we lead with diplomacy, a formal request to investigate the connections between the palace and the miasma incidents. Only if they refuse do we escalate. Agreed, Nero nodded. But we should prepare for that escalation from the outset. I'll accompany the students, along with Lee. Our presence should be sufficient to handle most threats, while still appearing respectful rather than provocative. Magnus leaned forward, his arms crossed over the table as his expression shifted from amusement to firm, unwavering confidence. This isn't just about the mission, he said, his voice dropping to a pitch that seemed to resonate directly with the bones of everyone present. It's about experience. These students need to learn what it means to face real threats, to stand shoulder to shoulder with the world's best. And with all the firepower we're bringing, this is the safest way for them to do it. A crucible, Lee murmured, nodding slowly. The future defenders of humanity forged in the heat of genuine danger, yet protected by our presence. I dislike using students as bait, Zhang said, turning away from the window as his expression darkened. Even with supervision, this is a risk. Are you certain it's wise? What if something goes wrong? Then we adapt, Lee replied simply, as we've always done. Nothing will go wrong, Magnus said with absolute conviction. Every one of these kids has reached at least mid-silver rank. A good number are white rank, and there are several already at integration rank. They'll have the support of multiple ascendant rankers, 2 immortal rankers, and me, the strongest in the world. He stated this last part not as boast but as simple fact, like observing that water is wet or gravity pulls downward. We'll organize them into tactical units, Nero suggested, warming to the plan. Each led by an experienced fighter, with a balanced composition of combat specialists and support mages. That structure offers both security and practical field experience. Zhang's worry didn't entirely fade, but he nodded slowly, the logic of their arguments wearing down his resistance. Fine, he said, though his tone remained reluctant. But if it starts going sideways, I hope you're ready to step in. We can't afford to lose anyone, Magnus. Not a single student. Magnus' gaze was steady, his voice quiet but resolute. Don't worry, I've got this. When do we depart? Li asked, already mentally preparing for the journey. 3 days, Nero replied after a moment's calculation. That gives us time to prepare the students, gather supplies, and arrange transportation. The Luthadal Sea isn't easily crossed, and we can't use teleportation gates directly to the island. Their isolation protocols would prevent it. We'll need water-capable transport, Zhang noted. The nanomaterial buses can be reconfigured for sea travel, but the journey will still take at least a day once we reach the coast. I'll inform the students tonight, Li decided. They'll need time to prepare themselves mentally as well as physically. The room fell silent once more as the weight of what they were undertaking settled over them all. 200 students, backed by some of the most powerful individuals on the planet, preparing to confront an isolated power with unknown capabilities and suspicious connections. As they rose to leave, Magnus remained seated, his gaze distant as if seeing beyond the walls around them to some future only he could perceive. Magnus, Zhang prompted, pausing at the doorway. The martial king's expression cleared, his characteristic smirk returning. Just thinking, he said lightly. It's been a while since I've had a proper fight. Zhang shook his head, unable to fully suppress a smile of his own. Only you would look forward to this. What can I say? Magnus replied, rising to his full, imposing height. I'm an optimist. Chapter 431. Southern Sea Sun Palace, 1. The professors, alongside figures whose combined power could rearrange continental shelves if they collectively sneezed, had orchestrated what they cheerfully called a joint mission. This pleasant euphemism encompassed sending all third-year students directly into what I strongly suspected was a vampire-infested death trap. The scale of this undertaking was like nothing we had faced before, which was saying something considering our previous exploits had included subterranean cults and creatures whose existence violated several laws of physics. The reinforcements alone suggested that someone, somewhere, had actually done a proper risk assessment and promptly had a panic attack. The lightning dragon of the Mount Hua sect, Li Zenith himself, had joined our merry band of potential martyrs. His reputation preceded him in the way that thunder precedes lightning. Impressive, attention-grabbing, and a warning that something more dangerous was imminent. Each of the 5 great families and the other 2 sects had also sent an ascendant ranker, presumably to ensure that if we all died, at least it would be properly documented by observers from every major power. Our roster read like the setup for an elaborate joke. 1 radiant ranker, 2 immortal rankers, 10 ascendant rankers, and 200 students who had barely mastered the art of not setting their own homework on fire, all between 17 and 18, journeying southward to what might well be our collective doom. This is big, isn't it? Serafina observed as she walked alongside me, her tone carrying both excitement and a touch of unease. Her silver hair caught the light, framing a face as beautiful as it was disconcertingly calm about our potential demise. I glanced at her and offered what I hoped was a reassuring smile. It is, but we don't have much to worry about with Master Magnus leading us. Please tell Master Li he can relax before he accidentally electrocutes someone with his nervous energy. She laughed softly, the tension in her expression easing like ice melting under an unexpected ray of sunlight. You should talk to him yourself. He hasn't seen you in a long time, you know. He keeps asking about your progress. I nodded, acknowledging her point. I owed Lee Zenith more than I could easily repay, which was unfortunate as the currency of gratitude doesn't offer installment plans. Serafina herself had grown remarkably stronger since our early days. She had recently reached integration rank, her aura sharper than a tax auditor's pencil, her presence more commanding than a librarian catching someone eating chocolate near a first edition. The girl walking beside me now bore little resemblance to the character I remembered from the novel I'd read in my previous life. Well, this time you won't try to take care of everything yourself, right? Cecilia teased, hooking her arm around mine with the proprietary air of someone who has already written her name on the item in question. Her crimson eyes gleamed with expectation, daring me to contradict her. It's not like I had much of a choice last time, I replied honestly, though her glare told me this answer ranked somewhere between the dog ate my homework and I thought the red button was decorative on the scale of accepted excuses. Rachel chuckled from the seat across, flashing me a knowing smile. Her golden hair caught the sunlight streaming through the window, creating a halo effect that somewhat undercut her attempt at looking stern. Don't worry, Cece. This time he won't have the chance to play the lone hero. We'll be watching him like hawks. More like vultures, I muttered under my breath, earning a light smack on the arm from Cecilia. Rose, seated beside Rachel, glanced up from the book she'd been studying. Her auburn eyes, sharp with intelligence, met mine over the top of the book she was reading. The bus rumbled steadily onward, carrying us southward through a landscape that gradually transformed from the familiar eastern terrain to something wilder, more vibrant. Our journey wasn't limited to mundane roads. It was punctuated by teleportation gates, vast arcs of shimmering mana that hummed with power as the bus passed through. Each leap brought us closer to our destination and to the weight hanging over my thoughts. The Southern Sea Sun Palace. And vampires. The connection between the palace and the vampires gnawed at me like a particularly determined rodent with a taste for existential dread. The vampire city hidden under Starcrest Academy and the Red Chalice cult's headquarters both loomed large in my mind, pieces of a puzzle I'd thought I understood. But this mission wasn't something I'd foreseen. Not even my knowledge of the novel had prepared me for this particular deviation from the script. The Southern Sea Sun Palace and its island? Complete blank. Nothing to guide me. This was entirely uncharted territory. A divergence from the narrative that made me feel like a reader who had suddenly discovered extra chapters mysteriously inserted into a familiar book. A chill ran down my spine. Whatever lay ahead could completely alter the course of events. The bus slowed as we approached the Southern Sea, a vast expanse of water that stretched toward the horizon like an artist's ambitious attempt to paint infinity. The Luthiddle Sea, as it was called, wasn't merely a sea in the same way that Mount Everest isn't merely a hill. It bordered on being an ocean, its sheer size a testament to its power and beauty. This colossal body of water had divided the eastern and southern continents so effectively that for centuries, their cultures had developed with only the vaguest awareness of each other's existence. Only with recent technological advances had the two regions begun to truly interact. Wow, Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible as she leaned toward the window, her golden hair catching the light. Her eyes sparkled with awe as she gazed out at the expanse of shimmering blue. The Luthiddle Sea makes the Cobalt Sea look like a cute little pond. The Cobalt Sea is a cute little pond, Rose corrected without looking up from her book. It's approximately 1/8 the volume of the Luthiddle and significantly less saline. Her tone suggested that bodies of water should know better than to misrepresent their credentials in her presence. I followed Rachel's gaze, the sight before us as humbling as it was beautiful. The waters stretched endlessly, their surface glinting under the sun like scattered diamonds. The Southern Sea Sun Palace's island lay somewhere beyond this vastness, its secrets waiting with the patience of a predator that knows its prey is approaching. But a question nagged at me like an itch in an unreachable spot. How were we supposed to get there? Teleportation gates couldn't be used, not with the defenses the palace likely had in place. Crossing by traditional means seemed the only option, but with 200 students, the logistics didn't add up, and math rarely makes exceptions for inconvenient scenarios. As if to answer my unspoken question, the buses pulled to a stop, and we were ushered outside. All of us stood in a long line, staring out at the sea, the salty breeze brushing against our faces with the casual familiarity of a relative who never learned about personal space. Then something remarkable happened. The buses began to shift, their metallic forms rippling and folding in on themselves like origami, performed by an invisible master craftsman. My eyes widened as sleek boats emerged where the buses had once been, their surfaces gleaming with a metallic sheen that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. What? I breathed, unable to hide my astonishment. Nanotechnology. The buses had transformed into watercraft, their functionality extending far beyond anything I'd imagined. I guess this world's tech still manages to surprise me, I thought. This was a stark reminder of just how advanced this world was compared to the one I'd come from. It wasn't merely 2 decades in the future, it was a leap forward in every way that mattered, as if someone had taken the concept of progress and strapped rocket boosters to it. Show-offs, Rose commented dryly, though I noticed she was taking detailed notes on the transformation process, her eyes bright with the particular gleam that appears when an academic encounters something worthy of a research paper. The boats slid gracefully into the water, their engines humming softly as they powered up with the gentle purr of extremely expensive technology functioning exactly as intended. One by one, the students were directed to board, and soon we were gliding over the Luthadal Sea, the waves parting before us as if they'd received a stern memo about our arrival. As I sat with the others, the sea stretching endlessly before us, I couldn't shake the weight of what lay ahead. The Southern Sea Sun Palace was waiting, along with whatever secrets it held, and possibly a congregation of vampires who would view our arrival less as a diplomatic visit and more as a convenient food delivery service. But as Cecilia leaned against my shoulder, Rachel watched the horizon with bright-eyed wonder. Rose muttered calculations under her breath, and Seraphina's cool hand found mine in silent support. I realized that whatever waited for us, at least I wouldn't be facing it alone, which was, perhaps, the most terrifying thought of all. Chapter 432. Southern Sea Sun Palace. 2. The Southern Sea Sun Palace, Lucifer muttered, his verdant eyes narrowing as he leaned against the boat's rail, the spray of salt water misting his face like nature's own dramatic special effect. I couldn't blame him for his uncharacteristic loss for words. The view before us demanded silence, as though the scene itself might shatter like a soap bubble if words were spoken with too much force or carelessness. The palace wasn't merely a stronghold, in the way that a supernova isn't merely a warm light. It was a colossal island nation, home to millions, sprawling across thousands of square kilometers. A size that made even the Isle of Azure Breeze seem like a child's sandcastle by comparison. Yet, for all its grand scale, it was but a speck compared to the territories ruled by the great superpowers. The Slatemark Empire alone spread its dominion across lands as vast as Africa from my past life, though its power rested on a complex web of vassals and alliances that would give even the most dedicated political scientist a migraine. This island was different. It stood alone, unbroken by time or tide, governed directly by the Southern Sea Sun Palace itself. For centuries, it had been an enigma, a quiet corner of the world that neither bent nor broke beneath the rise of the heavenly demon or the wars that reshaped continents. Its isolation wasn't merely geographic, it was a deliberate stance, a defiance, a statement written in landmass and architecture. And now, that defiance had transformed into vulnerability. My heart thumped against my ribs like a prisoner attempting escape as I considered the gravity of it all. This island, this fortress of legend, had fallen to vampires and the Red Chalice cult. The sheer audacity of such a conquest was staggering. True, the cult had the power to pull off such a feat, but even they rarely made such bold moves in a world bristling with satellites and the all-seeing eyes of modern technology. But the Southern Sea Sun Palace wasn't like the rest of the world. It existed outside the realm of surveillance, hidden not by mere shadows but by something far more profound. I tilted my head back, and there it was, the colossal orb hanging above the island, visible even from miles away. It burned like a fragment of the sun itself, a testament to the island's name and its power. This was the Red Sun, the legendary grade artifact that served as the heart of the Southern Sea Sun Palace. It wasn't tethered to an individual, as such artifacts often were, but to the bloodline of the palace's rulers. It had illuminated this land for centuries, untamed and unmatched. Now that light stood in the hands of darkness. If they have a legendary-grade artifact, why aren't they stronger? Ian asked, tilting his head, his golden eyes sharp with curiosity. Because none of the lords can wield it properly, I replied, my voice calm but tinged with the weight of history. There was a time, long ago, when the lords of the Southern Sea Sun Palace stood tall, wielding the red sun with a ferocity that rivaled even the Viserians. Back then, the artifact's brilliance was matched by their strength, and their might carved legends across the seas. But those days had faded like the echo of a once proud roar. The current lords, though bonded to the artifact by bloodline, lacked the worthiness that the red sun demanded. It's not enough to inherit power, I continued. You have to earn it. The red sun bonds to their blood, not their souls. Without that true connection, it won't yield its full potential. That was the tragedy of the Southern Sea Sun Palace. What was once a bastion of strength had been reduced to mediocrity, surpassed even by the Gu family as their influence waned. Of course, that doesn't mean they're weak, Nero interjected, his gaze fixed on the shimmering orb that dominated the horizon. The legendary-grade artifact pulsed faintly, as if alive. Underestimating them would be foolish. We nodded, the unspoken weight of his words pressing on us like the heavy air before a storm. Some of the students aboard the ship had allowed themselves a sense of safety, lulled by the presence of the Martial King. But I knew better. A soft weight suddenly pressed against my arm, accompanied by a familiar gentle snore. I glanced down to find Clara had practically collapsed against me, sound asleep as usual. Her head lolled against my shoulder, her mouth slightly open, completely dead to the world despite the historical moment unfolding before us. Even the presence of a legendary-grade artifact and the looming threat of vampire infestation couldn't keep her awake. I chuckled, genuinely amused despite the gravity of our situation. Clara had built her entire fighting style around her perpetual state of drowsiness, somehow turning what should have been a crippling weakness into a surprisingly effective combat technique. Really, Clara? Now? I whispered, though I knew it was pointless. She could sleep through an apocalypse if given the chance. Is she seriously sleeping through our arrival at the Southern Sea Sun Palace? Rose asked with an exasperated sigh, her auburn eyes narrowing at Clara's peacefully dozing form. At least she waited until we got here, Rachel offered optimistically. Remember when she fell asleep in the middle of Professor Nero's lecture on existential threats? While standing, Cecilia smirked, her crimson eyes gleaming with mischief. I'm tempted to draw on her face, but last time I tried that, she somehow countered me in her sleep. It's her gift, Serafina noted with clinical detachment. Subconsciousness is her domain. Underestimate it at your peril. The Martial King wasn't here to save us at the first sign of danger. He would step in only if he had to. And with the looming shadow of the Red Chalice cult, the stakes had never been higher. I'm going to talk to Master Li, I said to the others, carefully extracting myself from Clara's deadweight. She immediately slumped against Cecilia instead, who looked both annoyed and strangely honored by the unconscious vote of confidence. My feet found their way across the deck with purpose as I sought the lightning dragon of Mount Hua. Arthur, Master Li greeted me warmly, his face lighting up as he broke off his conversation with Serafina, his niece. She turned, her usual poised smile softening as she noticed me approaching. It's been a while, Master, I replied, bowing lightly in respect. Indeed it has, he said, his eyes narrowing in appraisal as they swept over me. The look of casual familiarity quickly gave way to something else entirely, shock. Arthur, tell me, he began, his voice tinged with suspicion. Did you stumble across some artifact that bends time when you went missing? I smiled faintly, letting his question hang in the air. Of course not, Master. Then how the hell is this possible? He muttered under his breath, his gaze still fixed on me as though trying to unravel a puzzle. I heard you defeated a bishop of the Umbervale Covenant. But this is absurd. It was absurd, I knew that much. My power now was beyond reason, beyond what anyone could reasonably expect of me. As the three of us chatted, I noticed Master Li's eyes darting between me and Seraphina, his gaze far too animated for casual conversation. I shot her a glance, silently asking if she'd let anything slip. Her stoic expression remained unbroken, which was as good as a denial. Seraphina wasn't one to crack easily, after all. You can just ask, Master, I said at last, breaking the growing tension. He didn't need a second invitation. So, what's going on between you two? Li asked, grinning like a child who'd found the cookie jar unguarded. Both Seraphina and I froze, caught off guard by his sudden directness. Her hand slipped into mine almost reflexively, her cheeks tinged with a soft blush. Well, I said, clearing my throat. We're dating now. Master Li's grin widened, his face lighting up as if he'd just discovered the secret to eternal youth. I knew it, he exclaimed, practically bouncing on his heels. I knew you'd win, Sarah. There's no winning here, I corrected, though his enthusiasm was hard to temper. I'm dating all four. Li froze mid-celebration, his expression shifting from triumph to sheer disbelief. His jaw slackened, and he stared at me as though I'd just confessed to stealing the sun from the heavens. All four? He stammered, blinking rapidly. I nodded, calmly meeting his incredulous gaze. He turned to Seraphina for confirmation, his eyes silently pleading for this to be some elaborate joke. When she nodded with her usual serene composure, he looked back at me, visibly struggling to reconcile the situation. Then, as though struck by divine revelation, Master Li stepped closer, grasping my shoulders with both hands. His grip was firm, his expression deadly serious. Arthur, he said in a low voice, his words weighted with dramatic urgency. Are you trying to take over the world? What? I asked, completely thrown off. No, it all makes sense now, he continued, retreating a step as his hands flew to his temples in mock revelation. Your strength, ridiculous for a 17-year-old, dating 3 princesses and a high noble lady, and not just any princesses, but 3 from the world's superpowers and another at the head of the noble faction. It's a strategy, isn't it? You're consolidating power. You're trying to take over the world. Master, He waved me off, already lost in his own thoughts. I knew it. The Martial King has been training you, hasn't he? Of course he has. He's preparing you for conquest. I'm not taking over the world, I said, exasperated, though I could feel Seraphina's hand tighten on mine, likely to suppress her laughter. Master Li shot me a conspiratorial grin. Right. That's exactly what someone trying to take over the world would say. And with that, he leaned back, hands on his hips, clearly proud of the grand narrative he'd spun for himself. I sighed. There was no reasoning with him now. Chapter 433. Southern Sea Sun Palace. 3. I sighed, the weight of Master Li's misunderstanding settling on me like a particularly stubborn cloak determined to cling to its wearer through hurricane and hellfire alike. As his dramatic theories about my world domination plans danced merrily in his head, I let my azure eyes focus on him, their sharp clarity peeling back the veil of his strength. And there it was, his level of power, unmistakable now that I truly looked. He wasn't far from Vice Headmaster Valerie Brilliance, just a step below. Yet, compared to Nero, whose immortal rank presence was solid but middling, Master Li stood ahead. High immortal rank. So this is the might of one of the strongest immortal rankers in the world, I thought, an odd mixture of awe and determination tightening my chest. Of course, at my current strength, challenging him was laughable. It would remain laughable for years to come, like a toddler challenging a champion prizefighter. But that didn't matter. I had to grow, not slowly, not cautiously, but at a pace so furious it would consume the world itself. Until then, I would have to make do, threading the needle between my limitations and the challenges before me with all the delicacy of performing surgery while wearing boxing gloves. Before I could dwell further, Master Li's demeanor shifted. His eyes widened, his body tense, and without a word, he spun on his heel and strode briskly out of the room. Serafina and I exchanged a glance, hers calm and questioning, mine curious but wary, before we followed him onto the open deck of the ship. The wind hit us, carrying with it the salt of the southern sea and something else. Something cold, metallic, and ominous. My eyes narrowed as I drew mana into them, sharpening my sight to focus on the distant island. And then I saw it. My breath hitched. Weapons, missiles, all aimed directly at us. I thought they'd be far behind in technology, Li said, his voice steady but with an edge of surprise. But it seems they've been busy during their isolation. Modern technology, though not quite modern enough. His tone carried a faint note of disdain, but I couldn't help but marvel. It wasn't quite up to the standards of this world, perhaps lagging 2 decades behind. But, of course, it didn't matter. As if to underscore that very thought, Master Li drew his blade from his spatial ring with a flourish. It was a curved silver sword, its craftsmanship exquisite, the hilt adorned with the plum blossom crest of the Mount Hua sect. The symbol gleamed faintly, as if even it carried a hint of the power it represented. Without hesitation, the blade came alive. Lightning astral energy coursed along its edge, crackling and dancing like a tempest barely contained. The energy pulsed with the unmistakable rhythm of sword heart, a level of mastery few ever reached. He won't even need sword domain for this, I thought, watching with quiet awe as he raised the sword. With a single swing, the lightning surged forward, lashing out like an uncoiled whip. The astral energy tore across the sky, covering the vast distance to the missiles in the blink of an eye. When it reached them, the air seemed to tremble. Defenses crumpled like paper, the missiles reduced to harmless debris in an instant. He didn't even need to use his art, I mused, the corners of my mouth twitching into a small, wry smile. That was the power of one of Mount Hua's finest, its second strongest, no less. Sure, I could have handled the missile defenses as well. Any integration ranker worth their salt could, really. But to dismantle them with nothing more than a casual flick of the wrist? That was a different kind of strength altogether. It wasn't just power, it was mastery. And Master Li? He wielded it as effortlessly as one breathes. Did we really have to attack? Rachel asked softly, her arms looping around mine as her sapphire eyes sought mine for reassurance. Her golden hair caught the sea breeze, framing her face like a halo that belied the concern knitting her brow. They weren't exactly going to roll out the welcome mat, Lucifer said dryly, his gaze fixed ahead. If we'd waited, they'd have blown the boat to smithereens. That's what they've done to anyone daring to approach, Li added, sliding his sword back into his spatial ring with a faint shimmer of light. Though, I'll admit, I didn't expect missiles. It is surprising, Nero agreed, his voice calm but edged with concern. Let's hope we can avoid escalating things further. Fighting the Southern Sea Sun Palace just to get access would complicate matters. Rose appeared at my other side. Her auburn eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a particularly volatile chemical reaction. The technological disparity is fascinating, she murmured, more to herself than to me. Their isolation has created a unique developmental pathway, adaptive yet stunted. Clara, who had somehow managed to stay awake through the missile attack, a minor miracle in itself, yawned widely. Wake me up when the scary people go away, she mumbled, her eyelids already drooping despite the tension crackling through the air. The boat pushed through the last stretch of surf, and soon, the island loomed before us. One by one, we disembarked. 200 students, 10 ascendant rankers, 2 immortal rankers, and the towering presence of the Martial King himself. The ships, their duty done, turned back toward the mainland. No one wanted them sitting idle here, ripe for destruction. Well, there goes our chance for a quick getaway, I muttered, mostly to myself. Why would we need that? Cecilia asked, tilting her head as crimson eyes settled on Magnus Drakar's broad back. Her tone was calm, curious, even faintly amused. She'd linked her arm through mine, her grip possessive and warm against the chill of my growing unease. She had a point, at least from her perspective. To most here, the Southern Sea Sun Palace posed little threat. The vampires, after all, had been eradicated nearly 2 centuries ago by Liam Kagu. And Magnus Drakkar, the most powerful figure in the world, was with us. What could go wrong under his watchful gaze? The thought was almost comforting if you didn't know what I knew. But I did. They didn't. To everyone else, the idea of encountering a radiant rancor here was unthinkable. Even the presence of multiple immortal rancors was a stretch. Yet I knew the truth. The Red Chalice cult had a way of rewriting expectations. If they were involved, and I couldn't shake the certainty that they were, then we were staring down far more than the Southern Sea Sun Palace's defenses. A radiant rancor, their cult leader, and an untold number of immortal rancors. I shoved my worries aside as the group came to an abrupt halt. The professors and adults at the front stopped walking, their postures still but tense. The students followed suit, confusion flickering through the crowd like whispers of an oncoming storm. Then I felt it. Presence. Heavy and unrelenting, like the weight of a storm cloud pressing down on my skin. I wasn't the only one who noticed. The other students stiffened as the oppressive aura swept over us. "So, they've come," Magnus Drakkar said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of amusement as he gazed ahead. A faint smile curled at his lips, as if he relished the challenge. And then they appeared. The figures moved with purpose, emerging from the treeline with a grace that was almost predatory. Their clothing was an elegant fusion of Eastern tradition and modern practicality, tailored for both mobility and breathability. But what drew the eye most was the symbol emblazoned on their garments. The red sun, glowing faintly against the fabric. The insignia of the Southern Sea Sun Palace. These were its people, and they had not come alone. At the front of the procession stood the Lord of the Palace. His fiery red hair and brilliant golden eyes mirrored Ian's, though his aura lacked the flashiness of youth. Instead, it radiated raw ferocity, like a blade honed to a perfect edge. His power wasn't merely seen. It was felt, like a searing heat against the skin. Low immortal rank. He wasn't Nero. He wasn't Master Li. But that didn't mean he wasn't a monster. Behind him stood 24 ascendant rankers, their presence like an unyielding tide. And behind them, an army of integration rankers, their number enough to fill the horizon. The students around me faltered, the oppressive pressure of their power threatening to crush the air from our lungs. It was palpable, inescapable, a silent statement of dominance. Rose shifted closer to me, her fingers brushing against mine, a silent gesture of support even as her analytical mind calculated our odds of survival. 2-1 on the ascendant rankers, she whispered, her voice steady despite the tension. Not ideal, but manageable with Magnus present. Cecilia's grip on my arm tightened, her free hand hovering near the ornate bracelet that concealed her spell matrix. Seraphina's face remained impassive, but I could feel the cold edge of her mana sharpening, ready to manifest her ice blade at a moment's notice. And yet, even in the face of such overwhelming might, Magnus Drakkar smiled. Suddenly, the suffocating aura was gone. It didn't fade or waver. It vanished, snuffed out as if it had never been there. My eyes widened in disbelief as I glanced at the martial king. His back, broad and steady, seemed impossibly larger now, a quiet wall against the looming storm. He hadn't said a word. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to remind the world who truly held power here. My gaze swept over the crowd before us, searching for faces I might recognize. But there was nothing, no familiarity, no spark of recognition. All of them were strangers, their stories erased before they could reach the pages of the novel I had once read in another life. These were the people who should have been long dead. That alone set my nerves on edge. But then my eyes settled on the 2 figures closest to the Lord of the Palace, and my heart nearly stopped. I stumbled back, my breath hitching in my throat as a cold sweat broke across my skin. Rachel steadied me, her concerned gaze searching my face, but I barely registered her touch. Why? Why in all the hells was he here? Chapter 434. Southern Sea Sun Palace. 4. There is a particular moment of clarity that descends upon a person when they recognize something they ought not recognize. Like spotting an assassin at a masquerade ball or identifying a long-forgotten face in a crowd of strangers. It's a dangerous kind of knowledge, the sort that makes one's blood freeze and heart stutter, even as the mind races to process implications too terrible to contemplate. A man stood at the Lord's right hand, his pale beauty framed by raven-black hair, his crimson eyes carrying the unmistakable hunger of a predator. And beside him, a woman with bubblegum pink hair and eyes that shifted between cyan and green, her delicate features belying the aura of malice that clung to her like perfume. Cassius von Noctis, the vampire prince, and Alisara Velcroix, the Pope of the Red Chalice. My worst fears confirmed in an instant, standing before us in broad daylight, their very presence a mockery of everything I thought I knew. And not a single person among our group recognized the danger. The cold fist of dread tightened around my heart as I realized that whatever plan I had carefully constructed was now as useful as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. This wasn't just bad. It was catastrophic. This was what made the cults so dangerous. It wasn't their ability to make people follow them with honeyed words, or the ability to rival a continent alongside the miasmic species in pure power. It was their ability to infiltrate. Right in front of us were Cassius von Noctis and Alisara Velcroix. And even Magnus Dracar, the strongest in the world, was none the wiser. "Greetings, Lord of the Southern Sea Sun Palace," Lee Zenith said, stepping forward with the easy confidence of a storm ready to break. A tempest of mana rippled from him, sharp and unmistakable, a quiet warning to the opposing force. The ascendant rankers shifted uneasily in response, their disciplined formation betraying faint cracks of tension. But the Lord of the Palace remained impassive, his fiery red eyes fixed firmly on Lee, as though trying to gauge the measure of the man standing before him. "Mount Hua sect," the Lord said at last, his gaze flicking to the plum blossom insignia embroidered into Lee's robes. "Yes," Lee replied with a faint smile. "I am the Lightning Dragon, a master of Mount Hua." The Lord's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, emotions flickering across them like shadows cast by a flickering flame. Suspicion, curiosity, perhaps even a trace of unease. "I was not aware Mount Hua had grown so strong," the Lord said, his voice carefully measured. But his words carried the weight of something deeper, a quiet disbelief born of outdated expectations. And that made sense. The Southern Sea Sun Palace had been absent from the world stage for centuries, retreating into isolation after the chaos wrought by the heavenly demon sect. Back then, the Namgung family had been the East's dominant force, and the Wudong sect had held the mantle of the strongest among the great sections. Mount Hua had been formidable, yes, but incomplete, its arts powerful but flawed, its influence diminished in comparison. But time had worked its quiet revolution. The rise of the celestial blossom swordsman had transformed Mount Hua, perfecting its once incomplete Grade 6 art. That single elevation had catapulted the sect to supremacy in the East, especially after the Namgung family lost their own Grade 6 art to the annals of history. Mount Hua now stood unchallenged, and the Southern Sea Sun Palace, still nursing wounds inflicted by the heavenly demon, had remained blind to this shift in power. The Lord's knowledge of Mount Hua was frozen in the past, a past where the current strength of someone like Lee Zenith would have been unthinkable. "Times have changed," Lee said smoothly, his faint smile carrying the weight of understated triumph. "Indeed they have," the Lord replied, his tone neutral, though the shifting light in his eyes betrayed his thoughts. "So tell me, why have you come here?" It was a simple question, but the air hung heavy with the tension of unspoken challenges, as if the very island itself waited for the answer. "We come seeking cultural exchange," Lee replied, his tone as steady as the mountains his sect called home. "The East has long respected the Southern Sea Sun Palace's wish to remain isolated. But now, after centuries of separation, we believe the time has come to renew ties between our peoples. to learn from each other's traditions and arts. The Lord's eyes hardened, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Cultural exchange? He repeated, the words dripping with disdain. Do you take me for a fool, Master Li? Your sudden interest in our culture comes just as incidents at our borders begin to raise questions. Li's smile remained in place, though a sharper edge had crept into it. I meant no offense, Lord Daedric, but if you prefer directness, then let us be direct. Investigation, then. The East has noticed unusual activities in the border towns, activities bearing the mark of your palace. Investigation? The Lord repeated, his voice low and cold, the word coiling like a serpent in the air. And what, pray tell, gives you the belief that you can simply do that? Li's smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew sharper, like the edge of a blade unsheathing. Because the world is no longer as it was. The world may not yet be united, but at the very least, the East is. The Lord's fiery gaze swept over the gathering, his expression unreadable. And you brought children? He asked, the faintest note of derision curling his lips as he looked past the three of them at us. Children more than capable of doing their job. Nero interjected smoothly, his voice carrying the confidence of someone utterly unbothered by the tension. The Lord's attention shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly as he regarded Nero with new interest. And you are Nero Estrellan, he said, inclining his head with a touch of formal politeness. From the central continent, also known by my epithet, Constellation Sorcerer. The words landed with a weight that wasn't entirely due to the title. Nero's presence, understated yet unyielding, seemed to fill the space between them. For a moment, the Lord said nothing, his expression inscrutable, though the flicker in his golden eyes suggested his feelings towards Nero. The air between them was taut, like the drawn string of a bow. Suddenly, Alisara stepped forward, her movements as fluid and deliberate as a dancer's, and leaned close to the Lord of the Southern Sea Sun Palace. She whispered something, her voice too low to hear but carrying a serpentine weight that seemed to ripple through the air. The Lord didn't flinch or even shift, clearly accustomed to such proximity and her counsel. After a moment, he straightened, his expression as impassive as ever. Very well, he said at last. We will permit your investigation. His fiery red eyes swept across our group, assessing and calculating. My name is Daedric Solarin, Lord of the Southern Sea Sun Palace. This? He gestured with a faint movement of his hand toward the crimson-clad figure beside him. Is Alisara my advisor, and the man next to her is Cassius, her disciple. Cassius inclined his head slightly, his crimson eyes flashing briefly under his dark lashes. He said nothing, but his presence was like a coiled spring, silent, but brimming with tension. However, Daedric continued, his voice tightening just enough to hint at steel beneath his calm exterior. We expect compensation from the East when your investigation inevitably uncovers nothing. Li inclined his head in a gesture of respect, his expression unruffled. Such compensation will be provided. I give you my word as a master of the Mount Hua sect. I couldn't ignore the unease prickling at the back of my mind. What are they planning? I thought, the wheels in my head spinning faster than I liked. My eyes met Alisara's. She was beautiful even more than Seraphina or the other girls. A bit too beautiful. But that wasn't what I was concerned with. Was she Emma? I needed to know that and only that, because of the message she sent through her cardinal back then. Alisara's gaze met mine. Instead of getting chills down my spine, I felt blood rush to my cheeks as she waved playfully at me. Why are you staring at her? Cecilia hissed, elbowing me sharply in the ribs. I blinked, realizing I'd been caught. Alisara's form had held my gaze far longer than it should have. Without thinking, the words slipped out. Because she's beautiful. The effect was instantaneous. For pairs of eyes turned on me, their expressions darkening in perfect, synchronized fury. The weight of their combined glares was enough to make even an immortal rancor break into a sweat. To make matters worse, Alisara had clearly caught my words. She turned her head, her cyan green eyes, tinged faintly with green, locking onto mine. Then, with a smile as sweet as honey laced with arsenic, she winked. The glares intensified. Chapter 435. Southern Sea Sun Palace. 5. Objectively, Alisara Velcroix was very beautiful. Her cotton candy pink hair cascaded in perfect waves, framing a face that seemed crafted by an artist with an impossible ideal in mind. Her eyes shimmered between cyan and green like the waters of a tropical lagoon, shifting under different lights. And her delicate features gave her the appearance of a teenager, though something in her bearing suggested an age far greater. But I wasn't worried about that. I was more concerned about determining whether she was Emma or not. That mattered much more to me. Emma, the girl who had once been my everything in another life, another world. The girl whose death had broken me in ways I couldn't articulate. The girl whose memory haunted me still, even in this world of mana and monsters. If Alisara was somehow Emma reborn, everything would change. The message from her cardinal over a year ago had contained details only Emma could have known. Details from my previous life, from a world where novels were just stories and magic existed only in imagination. How could she know these things unless— "I see you've noticed my advisor's beauty," Daedric said, his voice cutting through my thoughts like a knife. I hadn't realized he was looking at me, his fiery eyes narrowing with something between amusement and contempt. "Alisara is quite beautiful indeed," he continued, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "But she is also an exceptional advisor. Her counsel has proven invaluable to the Southern Sea Sun Palace." Alisara smiled demurely at his words, though the effect was somewhat undermined by the mischievous gleam in her eyes as they flicked back to me. "Beauty and wisdom often go hand in hand," she said, her voice musical and light, carrying just the faintest hint of an accent I couldn't place. "Though some appreciate the former more readily than the latter." I felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. From the corner of my eye, I caught Cassius glaring at me, his crimson eyes burning with an intensity that went beyond mere irritation. There was something possessive in his gaze, something dangerous and barely contained. The vampire prince was jealous. If the situation hadn't been so dire, I might have laughed at the absurdity of it. Instead, I forced myself to look away from both of them, only to meet the combined disapproval of 4 distinctly unhappy princesses. "Well," Daedric continued, either oblivious to or amused by the tension, "you have had a long journey. Allow us to escort you to the palace. We've prepared accommodations for your stay during this investigation." The way he said the word made it clear exactly what he thought of our presence here. This wasn't hospitality. It was a challenge, a dare. "Our transportation awaits," he added, gesturing toward a sleek track that I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden by the lush vegetation that bordered the beach. A train stood waiting, its silver surface gleaming in the sunlight. It wasn't the Hyperloop technology that had become standard across the eastern continent, but it was impressive nonetheless. A maglev system that, while perhaps 2 decades behind current technology, was still a marvel of engineering. "Your isolation hasn't stunted your technological advancement," Nero observed, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp with assessment. "We may be isolated, but we are not ignorant," Daedric replied stiffly. "The Southern Sea Sun Palace has always valued progress, even if we chart our own course." As we approached the train, I felt a hand slip into mine, Seraphina's cool fingers intertwining with my own. Her face remained impassive, but her grip conveyed what her expression did not. Concern, warning, a silent communication that she sensed something was wrong. "You're tense?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the maglev system. "Just cautious," I replied, equally quiet. "This place isn't what it seems." She nodded once, a slight motion that anyone not watching closely would have missed. Seraphina had always been perceptive, even if she didn't yet understand the full scope of what we were facing. The students were directed to board the rear cars of the train, while the professors and ascendant rankers were escorted to the forward compartments. As we filed in, I noticed that the interior was lavishly appointed, with plush seating and ornate decorations that spoke of a culture that valued beauty and comfort in equal measure. Rachel slid into the seat beside me, her golden hair catching the light filtering through the windows. Her sapphire eyes were troubled, though she attempted a smile. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice low. "And don't say nothing. I know that look." Before I could answer, Cecilia claimed the seat on my other side. Her crimson eyes narrowed with lingering irritation. "Yes, do tell us what's bothering you, other than being captivated by our host's beautiful advisor." Rose, sitting across from us, rolled her eyes at Cecilia's tone but leaned forward slightly, her auburn gaze fixed on me with analytical precision. "You recognize something or someone back there," she said. Not a question but a statement of observed fact. I hesitated. How could I explain that we were in the presence of the two most dangerous beings in the world without sounding paranoid? How could I tell them that the vampire prince and the Pope of the Red Chalice cult were within arm's reach, and not a single person, not even Magnus Dracar, had noticed? "It's complicated," I said finally. "I need more information before I can be sure." "Information about what?" Cecilia pressed, her voice sharpening. "About her." I sighed, knowing I was navigating dangerous waters. "Not about her beauty, if that's what you're asking." "Then what?" Cecilia's question was cut short as the compartment door slid open with a soft hiss. The conversation around us died instantly as a figure stepped into the car, her pink hair swaying slightly with the motion of the train. Alisara Velcroix stood in the doorway, her presence causing a ripple of whispers among the students. Her gaze swept across the compartment, lingering here and there as if assessing each of us in turn. Then her eyes met mine. Time seemed to slow, stretching like taffy between us as our gazes locked. There was recognition there, I was certain of it. Not the polite acknowledgement of a stranger, but something deeper, more visceral. A knowing that transcended our brief encounter on the beach. In that moment, I saw past the beauty, past the mask of the advisor. I saw something ancient and terrible and hungry, something that had set its sights on me for reasons I couldn't yet fathom. And beneath it all, buried so deep it was almost imperceptible, I glimpsed a flicker of something else. Something familiar. Something that made my heart stutter and my breath catch. "Emma?" The question hung unspoken between us, a bridge across an impossible chasm of worlds and lives. Alisara's lips curved into a smile that was both invitation and warning, promise and threat. Without breaking eye contact, she stepped fully into the compartment, the door sliding closed behind her with the finality of a tomb sealing shut. "I thought I'd personally welcome our young guests," she said, her voice carrying easily through the suddenly silent car. "After all, it isn't every day the Southern Sea Sun Palace hosts such distinguished visitors." But her eyes never left mine, and in their depths, I saw the unspoken truth. This wasn't a welcome. It was a claim. Chapter 436. Southern Sea Sun Palace. 6. There exists a peculiar sort of terror that comes from recognizing a predator that no one else can see. Like spotting a wolf in sheep's clothing while surrounded by oblivious shepherds. It's the sort of knowledge that sits heavy in the pit of one's stomach, a leaden weight of responsibility and dread that grows heavier with each passing moment. "Hello?" Alisara greeted, her voice like silk threaded with honey. Her smile was warm, inviting, utterly disarming. "May I have the honor of knowing the names of you ladies?" The four girls blinked, momentarily thrown off by the calmness of her words. They exchanged brief glances before responding. "I am Rachel Creighton, Princess of the North and daughter of the Creighton family." Rachel introduced herself, her voice steady and composed, as though etched in ice. "I am Cecilia Slatemark, Princess of the Slatemark Empire," Cecilia said sharply, her crimson eyes shimmering with barely contained fire. "I am Serafina Zenith, Princess of the Mount Hua sect," Serafina added, her tone cool but laden with frosty anger, a rare crack in her usual stoic demeanor. Rose stepped forward, her auburn eyes assessing Alisara with the clinical precision of a scientist examining a particularly dangerous specimen. "Rose Springshaper, daughter of Marquis Springshaper of Slatemark Empire," she said, her words clipped and precise. "It is an honor to meet such esteemed ladies," Alisara replied with a serene smile, bowing her head just slightly. "I am Alisara Velcroix, chief advisor to the Lord of the Palace, despite my humble age." She delivered the line flawlessly, radiating the kind of elegance that could put nobles to shame. Her demeanor was impeccable, graceful, poised, and effortlessly convincing. "She's really nailing the whole elegant diplomat act," I thought, begrudgingly impressed. The Slatemark Empire and the Creighton family were legendary even 2 centuries ago, their reputations carved deep into the annals of history. Of course, the Southern Sea Sun Palace would recognize their significance. Alisara, forced to pretend she was solely a product of the palace's isolation, had to be careful not to slip up and reveal more recent knowledge. But sociopaths, as they say, make excellent actors. And Alisara Velcroix? She wouldn't miss a beat. The rest of Class A followed suit, introducing themselves one by one. Alisara listened with intrigue, her cyan-green eyes gleaming faintly as she regarded us. 7 princes and princesses from across the globe, an unprecedented concentration of political power gathered in one train car. The significance wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Alisara. Clara, who had somehow remained awake through the entire journey, an achievement worthy of historical documentation, mumbled her introduction while stifling a yawn. "Clara Moon, combat specialist," she said, her eyelids already drooping dangerously. "Pleasure to meet you," she added as an afterthought, before promptly falling asleep while still standing. Alisara's eyebrow quirked upward ever so slightly, perhaps the only genuine reaction she'd shown thus far. The students from Starcrest Academy joined the introductions next. Among them, Arya Gu stepped forward, her name sharp and unmistakable. For the first time, Alisara's perfect facade faltered just slightly. A flicker of annoyance passed over her face, subtle but deliberate, before she smoothed it away with a hint of polite disdain. The effect was immediate. Everyone in the room noticed the reaction, and it only reinforced what we all knew from our history lessons. The Southern Sea Sun Palace despised the Gu family, even more than the Viserians, whose memory had faded over time. It was a masterstroke on Alisara's part. By playing her role so convincingly, she deepened the illusion of loyalty to the palace. If anyone had lingering doubts about her origins, they would evaporate like morning mist, and I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. Seeing Alisara's actions unfold in front of me, rather than reading about them in the relative safety of the novel's pages, was something else entirely. It wasn't just unsettling, it was downright terrifying. "Can you not sense her at all?" I asked Luna, my thoughts sharp with unease. "No, Arthur," Luna replied, her tone tinged with frustration. "She's impossible to pin down." Alisara wasn't truly invisible, of course. Her presence was there, but it was subdued, muted. It felt like the quiet hum of a silver rancor, utterly unremarkable. And therein lay the horror. A being of her caliber, a radiant rancor with the power to rival nations, was cloaking herself so perfectly that she felt no different from an ordinary woman. It was a level of deception that set my nerves on edge. "Then why are you here?" Cecilia asked, her voice steady but edged with faint venom that she didn't bother to hide entirely. Alisara's serene smile didn't waver. "Because this is the first time the Southern Sea Sun Palace has opened its doors to the world in centuries," she replied smoothly. "Even under such unfortunate circumstances, I thought it fitting to personally greet our young investigators." "There's nothing for you to worry about," Ava chimed in, her tone sharp and challenging. "If you truly are innocent." Alisara turned toward her, her cyan-green eyes sparkling with a glimmer of amusement. Her perfect smile stayed in place, unshaken by Ava's words. "That's wonderful to hear," she said, her voice as light and pleasant as a summer breeze. "I hope you all enjoy your stay here." Rose's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Your palace has quite the collection of magical artifacts," she observed, her tone conversational yet pointed. "I'd be particularly interested in learning more about your archival practices." It was an innocent request on the surface, a scholar's curiosity, but I recognized the subtle probe for what it was. Rose was testing boundaries, seeking information while watching for reactions. "Our archives are quite extensive," Alisara replied with practiced ease, "though some collections are, understandably, restricted. Perhaps a guided tour could be arranged for scholars with specific interests." The exchange seemed cordial, but the underlying tension was unmistakable. Two predators circling, assessing. The train began to slow as we approached our destination. Without another word, Alisara turned, her pink hair swaying with the movement. The soft gleam of light against her silk robes made her look every bit the dignified noblewoman she pretended to be. She cast a graceful wave of farewell over her shoulder as she departed, her every step measured and deliberate. As we stepped off the train, the red sun artifact loomed closer, its presence dominating the sky like a silent sentinel. Its sheer scale was staggering, and now, so near, its intricate details were clearer than ever. "How odd there's no red light," Ciola murmured, tilting her head as her golden eyes studied the orb. "Well, it's magic, not science," I pointed out. The red sun, for all its vibrant hue, cast no crimson glow over the island. Its light was a thing of its own, subtle, mysterious, unbound by the rules of nature. It was quite simply a magical existence. Behind us, more figures emerged from the other train cars. The adults stepped out with measured purpose, joined by the ever-watchful forces of the Southern Sea Sun Palace who had first greeted us at the shore. Their disciplined ranks moved with quiet precision, as though the very air around them carried the weight of their duty. Clara stumbled off the train, half asleep, and would have fallen face first onto the platform if Rose hadn't caught her with a sigh of practiced exasperation. "One day," Rose muttered, "you're going to fall asleep in the middle of a fight and get yourself killed." "Swhy, I made the drowsy fist," Clara mumbled through another yawn. "Fight better when I'm sleepy." "That makes absolutely no logical sense," Rose replied, but there was a hint of fondness in her voice as she steadied the drowsy fighter. My gaze was drawn upward, toward the heart of it all, the Palace of the Sun. It was a marvel, grand, imposing, and radiant. Its architecture caught the light of the actual sun, bending and refracting it to create a display that was both blindingly brilliant and breathtakingly beautiful. Despite its modern elements, the palace carried an almost ethereal grace, as though it existed halfway between the mortal and the divine. This was the center of the Southern Sea Sun Palace's power, the core of their isolation, and, most likely, the hidden nest of far more vampires than anyone here suspected. I glanced back at Magnus Dracar, who stood with an almost casual air, his gaze calm and distant. Only vampires above immortal rank could hide their presence from someone like him. Ascendant rank vampires might slip under his notice if he wasn't actively seeking them. But for how long? That was the question. The Palace of the Sun gleamed before us, a beacon of both beauty and menace. "To properly welcome our esteemed guests," Daedric Solaran announced, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "We shall host a banquet this evening after you've settled into your rooms. I ask that you all join us." "It would be our honor," Lee replied smoothly, offering a polite smile. His words carried the same ease as his posture, though his eyes hinted at the ever-present vigilance beneath. Daedric nodded once, satisfied, before gesturing for his attendants to lead us onward. And so, we were escorted to our rooms, the grandeur of the palace unfolding around us with every step. The path to our rooms wound through the heart of the Palace of the Sun, a place that seemed determined to remind us of its splendor at every turn. The corridors were vast, lined with towering columns that seemed to glow faintly, as though they absorbed and radiated the sunlight streaming through enchanted skylights high above. Intricate mosaics adorned the walls, depicting tales of battles, celebrations, and myths long forgotten by the rest of the world. Each step echoed faintly, the polished marble beneath our feet so flawless that it reflected the faint shimmer of the red sun hanging above the island. The air was warm but not stifling, perfumed with the faint scent of blooming flowers, though I saw none. The blending of eras was striking. The hallways felt ancient, their grandeur steeped in history, but the occasional flicker of modernity reminded us that this was no relic. Panels of softly glowing crystal embedded in the walls hinted at advanced magical technology, controlling the light, temperature, and who knew what else. It was as if the palace had plucked the best pieces from every age and woven them into a masterpiece. As we moved deeper, servants, silent and efficient, moved in and out of the halls, their movements unintrusive yet precise. They wore simple yet elegant uniforms marked with the red sun insignia, their expressions neutral but their eyes sharp. Even here, under the guise of hospitality, the vigilance of the Southern Sea Sun Palace was unyielding. Finally, we arrived at our rooms. The doors were grand, each carved with intricate designs unique to the guest inside. Mine bore swirling patterns of waves and storm clouds. As if mocking the turbulence, I felt stepping into this place. Inside, the room was both luxurious and austere. Sunlight poured through an enormous window that offered a sweeping view of the palace grounds and the red sun artifact beyond. The furnishings were tasteful, sleek and modern, yet carrying an unmistakable touch of traditional craftsmanship. A bed large enough to fit 3 people sat in the center, its frame carved with symbols I couldn't quite place. A faint, soothing hum seemed to emanate from the walls, an enchantment, no doubt, to ease the mind. Rose had been assigned the room adjacent to mine, and I could already hear her muttering about the architectural inconsistencies through the surprisingly thin walls. Cecilia had claimed the room across the hall, while Rachel and Serafina had been placed further down the corridor. Clara, to everyone's amusement, had been given a room with a bed so luxurious that the servants had practically had to pry her off it to continue the tour. Still, for all its comforts, the room felt less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. Chapter 437. Southern Sea Sun Palace. 7. Daedric Solarin's expression darkened as he sat in his grand office, the weight of his thoughts pressing down like an iron mantle. His mind kept circling back to the so-called investigators now housed within the palace walls. I can't push them away, he thought grimly. He knew that much. The red sun, with its limited powers he could access, had already shown him enough. Their strength wasn't just notable, it was alarming. Lee Zenith and Nero Estrellan were both immortal rankers. That alone would have been enough to command respect. But they weren't the problem. No, the issue was him. Magnus Dracar. Even with the red sun amplifying his senses, Daedric couldn't gauge the man's full power. That alone spoke volumes. It was a void, vast and unmeasurable, a presence so far beyond his understanding it felt like staring into an abyss. A sharp knock on the door jarred him from his thoughts. He straightened, his expression cooling into one of distant authority. "Enter," he said, his voice clipped. The door creaked open, and his daughter stepped in. "What are you doing here, Dia?" Daedric asked, his crimson eyes narrowing as they settled on her. She resembled him, her crimson hair and golden eyes a mirror of his own. But where his gaze burned with unyielding ferocity, hers held only a soft, muted glow. "I heard we have guests," Dia said carefully, her voice quiet but steady. "We do," Daedric replied curtly, waving a dismissive hand. "But don't waste your breath on them. They are nothing to concern yourself with." Dia hesitated, her expression conflicted. She seemed poised to say something more, but thought better of it and lowered her gaze. Daedric's mood soured further as he studied her. His sharp eyes took note of something that only added fuel to his anger. "You've been training more," he stated coldly. "Yes, father," Dia admitted softly, though her posture stiffened in preparation for what was to come. A surge of mana erupted from Daedric like a tidal wave, forcing her to her knees. "How dare you?" he snarled, his voice like thunder cracking through the air. "Did I not make myself clear? A woman trains no more than 4 hours a day, 20 hours a week at most. You are destined to bear my heir, not waste your time playing at warriors." Dia's lips tightened, her gaze fixed firmly on the floor as her fists clenched at her sides. She didn't argue. She never argued. That was not her place, not in his eyes. Her silence only served to deepen Daedric's scowl, though he said no more. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the window, his thoughts returning to the investigators and the boy who had no right to exist with such strength. His foul mood, already a storm, grew darker still. The door opened again, and two figures stepped inside. Daedric's eyes flicked toward them before returning to his desk, his expression unreadable as Alisara Velcroix and Cassius von Noctis entered the room. "Go, Dia," he said curtly, dismissing his daughter without so much as a second glance. She bowed silently, her face carefully neutral, and slipped out of the room. Alisara watched the girl leave with peripheral awareness, but her mind was elsewhere. The image of Arthur Nightingale surrounded by those four girls still burned in her thoughts, an unwelcome ember that refused to be extinguished. She had been unprepared for the visceral reaction that seeing him had triggered, a strange, hollow ache in her chest that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. It wasn't merely the boy's strength that intrigued her, though that alone was remarkable. Integration rank yet wielding power beyond the wall? Such a contradiction should not exist. But it was more than that. Something about his azure eyes, the particular way his brow furrowed when he was concerned, even the cadence of his voice. All of it struck chords of recognition within her that she couldn't explain. Alisara settled into the chair opposite Daedric with practiced grace, her movement fluid and deliberate as always. She maintained her faint, amused smile, the expression as much a part of her arsenal as the crimson threads she wielded in battle. She had perfected this mask over decades, a face that revealed only what she wished others to see. Playful cruelty, casual confidence, the benign disdain of a predator amid prey. But behind that mask, her thoughts churned like a tempest. The golden-haired saintess beside him, the ice princess with her silver hair, the crimson-eyed imperial princess, and the auburn-eyed mage. They surrounded Arthur like defenders around a king. The way they looked at him, the casual intimacy of their movements around him, the protective stance they adopted when her gaze had lingered too long. It all spoke of bonds deeper than mere friendship. The thought made something dark and possessive twist inside her. A feeling she had no name for, a hunger that went beyond the familiar desire to break, to control. "Looks like things are getting interesting," Cassius remarked, sliding into one of the chairs with an ease that bordered on insolence. His obsidian hair framed features too perfect to be anything but inhuman, his crimson eyes gleaming with predatory interest. Alisara felt his gaze on her, heavy with desire and desperate devotion. Cassius von Noctis, prince of vampires, heir to the monarch himself, and utterly beneath her notice except when useful. His fixation had amused her once. Now it was merely tedious, a distraction from more intriguing puzzles. Puzzles like Arthur Nightingale. "I wouldn't call it interesting," Daedric replied with a weary sigh, his gaze flicking between the two of them. Alisara could feel the hatred radiating from Daedric. His loathing for vampires was ancestral, passed down through generations of his bloodline. She had never bothered to feign concern about his feelings. What use was the sentiment of a man who would be dust long before her plans reached fruition? "Alisara will be dancing at the dinner, right?" Cassius asked, his crimson eyes narrowing slightly, their hue as dark and rich as freshly spilled blood. Daedric nodded, his fiery red gaze meeting Cassius's briefly before flicking toward Alisara. "Yes," Daedric confirmed. His gaze lingered on Alisara for a moment longer than he intended. She noticed, of course. Alisara noticed everything. The way Daedric's pupils dilated slightly, the quickening of his pulse when he looked at her too long, the subtle tells of a man fighting against desire. Men were so transparent, their wants and fears written across their faces for anyone with the patience to read them. But Arthur had been different. When their eyes had met on the train, there had been recognition, not of her position or her power, but of her. It was as if he had looked beyond the mask and seen something hidden beneath, something she herself had forgotten was there. A memory flickered at the edges of her consciousness. A field of flowers, sunlight streaming through cherry blossoms, and a crown of woven daisies placed upon her head by gentle hands. The memory was so vivid, so seemingly real, yet she knew it couldn't be hers. She had never known such gentleness, such happiness. Had she? Remember? Cassius said, his tone calm but carrying the weight of a threat as his fingers tapped rhythmically against the polished surface of the desk. There can't be any complications. There won't be, Daedric replied evenly, though his words carried an edge of warning. Not as long as all the vampires are gone. We're the only two in the palace now, Alisara said with a faint smile, leaning back in her chair as if the entire conversation amused her. Her cyan green eyes sparkled with a playful light, though the sharpness beneath it was impossible to miss. I'm looking forward to the performance tonight. The words, like everything she said, were perfectly poised. A simple statement, yet layered with subtlety and unspoken implications. But for once, she wasn't thinking about the dance, nor the carefully orchestrated game they were playing with the investigators. Her mind kept returning to Arthur, to the strange pull she felt toward him. The flower crown memory had surfaced the moment she saw him. Unbidden, unwelcome, yet persistent. It wasn't her memory, couldn't be, and yet, the ache in her chest when she saw him with those girls felt too genuine, too raw to be dismissed. Alisara had long ago learned to mistrust her own emotions. Feelings were weapons to be wielded against others, not indulgences to be heeded. Yet this feeling refused to be mastered, refused to be bent to her will. She would need to investigate this Arthur Nightingale more thoroughly. Perhaps then she could make sense of these fragments of memory, these echoes of someone she had never been. As the meeting concluded and she rose to leave, a single thought crystallized in her mind. Arthur Nightingale belonged to her, though neither of them yet understood why. And Alisara Velcroix always claimed what was hers. The dance tonight would be more than a performance. It would be a declaration, the first move in a game only she knew they were playing. She paused at the door, her fingers lingering on the handle as another memory flashed before her eyes. Clearer this time, almost painful in its vividness. A different world, a different life. Are you all right? Cassius asked, his voice cutting through her thoughts. Alisara turned to him, her mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. Of course, she replied, her tone light and musical. Just thinking about the dance. But as she walked away, her steps measured and deliberate, the question echoed in her mind like a haunting refrain. Was the memory truly hers? Or was it simply another weapon in a game she didn't know she was playing? A game where, for the first time in centuries, she might not hold all the cards. Chapter 438. Crimson Dancer 1. After freshening up in the opulent chambers provided by the Southern Sea Sun Palace, we changed into formal attire appropriate for the evening's banquet. The quarters were undeniably luxurious. All dark polished wood, hand-painted silks, and gleaming precious metals. But they lacked one crucial modern convenience: reliable network connectivity. The palace's antiquated systems were incompatible with our advanced devices, making even basic communication frustratingly archaic. I adjusted my formal jacket, resigned to relying on physical messengers and prearranged meeting points like we were living in the previous century. In a world of instant communication and real-time data, being disconnected felt like losing a limb. Palace attendants soon arrived to escort us through the labyrinthine corridors toward the grand hall. As we walked, the walls seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly quality, reflecting the crimson light of the red sun through carefully placed crystal elements. It was beautiful, certainly, but also deliberately intimidating, architecture designed to remind visitors of exactly whose domain they had entered. Our path intersected with another group, and I immediately recognized a familiar face. Arthur, Siola greeted, her golden eyes catching the light as she offered a measured smile. Siola, I returned the greeting with a slight inclination of my head, maintaining the appropriate formality. She stood flanked by her two friends. Arya Gu, with her characteristic fiery intensity barely contained beneath a veneer of court manners, and Ava Peng, whose quiet strength and calculating gaze missed nothing. Both were daughters of prominent Eastern families, their presence here significant in ways that went beyond mere attendance at a formal function. The East truly is the most fractured continent, I reflected. Internal conflicts were carefully managed, rarely erupting into open warfare, because when facing external threats, the East had learned the hard price of division. They couldn't afford such luxury, particularly not now. Not with whispers of the vampires and Red Chalice cult growing louder once more. The East's victory over the vampires 2 centuries ago was celebrated in history texts, but those accounts glossed over how desperately close they had come to annihilation. Only the intervention of Tiamat, the dragon who had flown from the southern continent to incinerate the vampire's stronghold, had turned the tide. The first hero, Liam Kagu, whose strength had become nearly mythological, had then eliminated the survivors. Without Tiamat's decisive action, the East would have fallen. Caught between the heavenly demon and the vampire forces, they would have been overwhelmed completely. And now, the vampires and the Red Chalice cult had grown stronger during their period of relative quiet. With the demons no longer dividing their attention, they focused on rebuilding their strength and extending their influence. If they were to ally as they had almost 2 centuries ago, the East, perhaps the entire world, might not escape a second time. Especially not with the vampire monarch himself being such a catastrophic threat. In the original narrative, he had systematically destroyed the Kagu family so thoroughly that even their name nearly vanished from history. He wasn't an enemy you allowed to recover his full strength. Dealing with him while he remained vulnerable was imperative. But first, the Southern Sea Sun Palace needed to be freed from the grip of the vampires and their cultist allies. One carefully planned step at a time. We arrived at the Grand Hall, where massive enchanted crystal chandeliers bathed the space in ethereal light that shifted subtly between warm gold and cool silver. The effect was mesmerizing, designed to disorient newcomers while flattering the palace residents. Standing at the entrance, waiting with varying degrees of patience, were the 4 girls. "Finally!" Rachel exclaimed, stepping forward to capture my hand in hers. "We've been waiting forever." She wore a pure white gown that seemed almost bridal in its elegance, the fabric catching the light in ways that made her appear to glow from within. The effect was both stunning and slightly confusing. It seemed excessive even for a formal banquet. "Well, we have you for now," Cecilia said with practiced smoothness, claiming my other arm with subtle possessiveness. Her dress was deep crimson, matching her striking eyes and contrasting beautifully with her golden hair. The cut was both regal and daring, befitting her status as crown princess. "Indeed," Serafina agreed quietly, her ice-blue eyes assessing me with characteristic precision. Her flowing gown in midnight blue shimmered faintly with each movement, reminiscent of moonlight on water. The azure hairpin securing her silver hair added a touch of calculated elegance to her ethereal presence. "You clean up nicely," Rose observed with her characteristic calm, a hint of warmth in her amber eyes as she joined our circle. Her dress was a rich emerald that complemented her chestnut hair, styled in an elaborate updo that emphasized her elegant neck. Each of them was breathtaking in her own way, commanding attention without seeming to try. Yet despite the crowded hall filling with Eastern nobility and palace dignitaries, their focus remained entirely on me. It was simultaneously flattering and deeply unnerving. The intensity of their collective gaze, each woman looking at me as though I were the only person of consequence in the entire palace, sent a prickle of awareness down my spine. The grand hall continued filling as notable figures took their designated places. The room's oppressive grandeur, vaulted ceilings supported by columns inscribed with ancient texts, floors of polished stone that reflected the enchanted lighting, seemed designed to make individuals feel insignificant beneath the weight of centuries. At the head of the hall, Lord Daedric Solarin ascended his ornate throne, his crimson gaze methodically surveying the gathering. His expression revealed nothing, but the slight tensing of his fingers against the armrests betrayed his carefully controlled alertness. Seated nearest to him were Lee Zenith, Nero Estrellan, and Magnus Dracar, their proximity to the Lord a clear indicator of their significance. Power recognized power even across ideological divides. The rest of us were guided to our assigned positions. Predictably, the 4 girls arranged themselves around me, Rachel and Cecilia claiming the seats on either side, while Serafina and Rose took positions directly across the table. Serafina's faintly irritated glance at Rose suggested some private negotiation had occurred before our arrival, with results not entirely to her satisfaction. Conversation rose around us, punctuated by the subtle music of crystal glasses touching in ceremonial toasts, and the occasional burst of carefully modulated laughter. The aroma of exotic dishes wafted through the air as servers began to present the feast's first course. Yet beneath the veneer of celebration lay unmistakable tension. The Southern Sea Sun Palace wasn't merely hosting a diplomatic function. This was a carefully choreographed display where every interaction carried layered meanings. The three figures closest to Lord Daedric, Lee, Nero, and Magnus, served as constant reminders of why we had come and what truly lay beneath the surface. I noticed the strategic glances exchanged between the girls. Rachel's mischievous smile as she leaned closer than strictly necessary, Cecilia's imperious adjustment of her position to maintain equal claim on my attention, Serafina's cool assessment of potential threats throughout the room, and Rose's quiet observation of everyone's behavior, missing nothing despite her seemingly relaxed demeanor. The ambient music gradually faded, replaced by a single haunting melody that commanded attention without demanding it. Conversations hushed, utensils were carefully set aside, and all eyes turned toward the center of the hall where an open space had been preserved. The lighting shifted, focusing into a single brilliant spotlight that illuminated the empty performance area. Anticipation rippled through the crowd as they waited for what was clearly a highlight of the evening's entertainment. And then she appeared. Alisara stepped into the light with movements so fluid they seemed more water than human. Collective gasps echoed through the hall as the Crimson Dancer claimed her stage, each deliberate step creating its own narrative of grace and control. Her dancer's attire, simultaneously modest and provocative, seemed to defy physical laws in how it accentuated her form. Diaphanous silk in shades of deep rose and blood red clung to her figure, revealing and concealing in an artful dance of its own. Her vibrant pink hair, her most distinctive feature, flowed around her like living flame, framing features that struck the perfect balance between strength and vulnerability. The entire assembly appeared equally affected. Women stared with expressions ranging from professional admiration to undisguised envy, while men seemed transfixed, their desires transparent in their unguarded gazes. Even the four princesses weren't immune. Rachel's playful confidence faltered slightly, Cecilia's imperial poise tensed with recognition of a different kind of power, Serafina's analytical detachment gave way to grudging appreciation of technique, and Rose's calm observation deepened into careful study of a potential threat. This was Alisara's true power as leader of the Red Chalice cult. Her dancing was not merely art but weaponized charisma, a means of disarming defenses that had nothing to do with physical combat. She didn't need to kill like the vampires she served. Her methods were subtler and often more effective. A glance, a gesture, a perfectly executed movement, and barriers crumbled without victims realizing their danger until far too late. As she began her performance, commanding the rapt attention of everyone present, I wondered how many in this room, even those who considered themselves immune to manipulation, had already fallen under her influence. I glanced toward Lucifer, noting his measured response. The faint color in his cheeks betrayed that he wasn't completely immune to Alisara's performance, but his self-awareness and control remained intact. As expected of the protagonist, his mental discipline matched his combat prowess. Alisara's spell might entrance others, but Lucifer would not be so easily compromised. Yet he was still blushing. For some reason, that twisted my heart more than I wanted to admit. Chapter 439, Crimson Dancer, 2. Lucifer's verdant eyes met mine across the hall. A moment of silent acknowledgement before I looked away like a man who'd accidentally made eye contact with a public mirror and regretted seeing himself. His subtle nod carried a warning I didn't need. We both recognized the danger in the room, though perhaps for different reasons. Not good. These emotions again. Nasty little things, creeping through the cracks of my carefully constructed composure like invasive vines through pavement. I didn't have time for this. I didn't have space for this. And yet, My brain kept superimposing Emma's face onto Alisara's like some emotionally traumatic augmented reality filter I couldn't disable. Emma, the girl who once painted color into my grayscale world. Back in my previous life, she'd been everything. The gravity that kept me grounded, the compass that gave me direction. The one person who saw beyond my carefully constructed walls. Which, as my internal critic promptly pointed out, was a bit dramatic considering I now had 4 beautiful girls who loved me, a family that still breathed, and friends who'd die for me. But sure, nothing. Don't be stupid, Arthur, I muttered to myself, silent as a whisper of air, the words more vibration than sound. This wasn't then. This was now. And now, survival was the only non-negotiable on the list. The Southern Sea Sun Palace wasn't a place for emotional weakness or distraction. Every gesture here was calculated, every smile a mask for deeper intentions. Allowing old memories to cloud my judgment could be fatal, not just for me, but for everyone who depended on me. No distractions, no delusions, no eye contact. I exhaled slowly, methodically steadying the storm in my head, and forced myself to look at Alisara again. Not as Emma, not as anyone I'd once cared for, but as exactly what she was. A walking, dancing red flag with legs carved by divine hands and a gaze that could give high-level AIs an existential crisis. Alisara Velcroix was not Emma. She wasn't some ghost from my past seeking redemption or connection. She was the Crimson Dancer, leader of the Red Chalice cult, one of the most dangerous individuals in this world. The similarities were cruel coincidence, nothing more. I tightened my grip on Cecilia's hand, tactile grounding, as any good therapist would call it, and focused on the warmth in her fingers. Real, present, mine. This was where I stood, not lost in the ghosts of another life. The music shifted in the background, swelling like some ancient spell reborn through circuitry and strings. The orchestra had been positioned for optimal acoustics, their instruments expertly crafted from materials both traditional and enhanced with maniconductive elements. Each note seemed to physically touch the skin, creating a sensory experience that transcended mere sound. Alisara moved with the kind of elegance that made professional dancers weep and master animators take frantic notes. She wasn't just dancing. She was rewriting the definition of movement itself. Her body flowed in perfect synchrony with the music, as if the universe had temporarily suspended its laws of physics exclusively for her performance. Her pink hair caught the chandelier light and transformed into a halo of fire-tinted silk, flaring out with every spin like liquid flame. The fabrics she wore didn't merely cling to her form. They negotiated territory across her body, shimmering, sliding, whispering secrets with every turn. To the untrained eye, it might seem excessive, theatrical even, until you remembered this wasn't just art. It was psychological warfare conducted through silk and bare feet. Each move displayed precision that suggested a gyroscope where her spine should be. But it wasn't mechanical or rigid. No, there was something almost unpredictable. Her spontaneity wasn't random chaos. It was deliberately designed. When she leapt, she seemed to float a microsecond longer than physics should allow. When she landed, she barely made a sound, as if gravity itself played favorites. Her eyes, cyan green and unervingly clear, swept across the crowd with predatory awareness. One by one, she locked gazes with audience members, holding the connection just long enough to imprint herself onto their cerebral cortex before moving on. The nobles of the Eastern continent were utterly captivated. Women stared with tight smiles that barely concealed their calculations of inadequacy. The men? Their expressions ranged from slack-jawed admiration to thinly veiled desire, their thoughts as transparent as glass. Lord Daedric himself, typically a study in regal detachment, seemed to lean forward almost imperceptibly in his throne. Even Lee Zenith, whose emotional control was legendary, watched with unusual intensity. Only Magnus and Nero maintained complete composure, their expressions revealing nothing. Professional courtesy between predators. Throughout the performance, Alisara's feet made soft, rhythmic contacts with the crystal-tiled floor, each precise step blending into the music like a subliminal heartbeat. The tempo surged, and her movements sharpened accordingly. Her flowing grace transformed into something more electric. She twirled, snapped, curved, her limbs slicing the air like weapons masquerading as poetry. Then, in a moment that felt both deliberate and spontaneous, she turned her head, just a slight tilt, and looked directly at me. I forgot how to breathe. There was mischief in her eyes. Not flirtation, not seduction. Amusement. The kind cats display right before they deliberately swat a glass off the table. A glint that said, "I know what you're thinking, and I'm going to make it worse." And then she was gone again, pulled back into her dance as if the moment had never occurred, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined the entire exchange. Beside me, Cecilia's hand clamped around mine like a vice. Her nails dug into my skin, not to cause pain but to assert possession. "She's good," she said, those two simple words struggling to contain the complex emotions beneath them. Rachel leaned in from my other side, her voice low and tense. "Too good," she muttered, her tone suggesting she was watching someone plant explosives rather than perform a dance. Serafina didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was like a pressurized tank, outwardly calm but humming with dangerous potential beneath the surface. Her ice-blue eyes tracked Alisara's movements with the calculating precision of a tactician assessing a new weapon. Rose maintained outward composure similar to Serafina's, but subtle tells betrayed her inner turmoil, the slight tension in her jaw, the too deliberate way she maintained her breathing. Her amber eyes missed nothing, cataloging every reaction in the room while her fingers continued their almost imperceptible pattern tapping against her glass. Through it all, the dance intensified. Alisara's movements became more intricate, more demanding, pushing the boundaries of what seemed physically possible. Each gesture told a story, though the narrative remained deliberately ambiguous, allowing observers to project their own meanings, their own desires. The music reached its final crescendo, a sound so grand and all-encompassing it felt like the composers had been attempting to simulate the universe's birth in orchestral format. Alisara responded with ever-increasing intensity, her silhouette blurring into streaks of gold and rose as she spun faster. Then, with perfect timing, she executed a single, flawless leap that seemed to defy gravity entirely. She landed in absolute silence, arms raised triumphantly, chin tilted at the perfect angle to catch the light. Perfect. Impossibly perfect. Silence hung in the air for a single, suspended breath. Then came the applause, roaring, relentless, almost feverish in its intensity. This wasn't mere appreciation. It was surrender. She hadn't just performed for the room. She had claimed it, branded it, left her signature across every consciousness present. Her smile could have powered a mid-sized city, radiant with satisfaction and something darker. Her cyan green eyes drifted across the crowd, absorbing the admiration like solar panels drinking sunlight, until they found mine once more. She winked. It wasn't flirtatious. It was infuriating, like a sniper taking credit for a perfect shot. A subtle, mocking gesture that carried messages only I seemed to understand. Beside me, Cecilia's grip somehow intensified further. I was losing circulation. On my other side, Rachel glared at me as if I'd personally failed to defuse a bomb someone else had thrown. "Why the hell is he always a damn magnet?" Rachel grumbled, as if this were somehow my fault and not the cosmic joke it clearly was. Cecilia didn't speak, just squeezed my hand like she was transmitting a message through my bones. Across the table, Rose and Serafina exchanged glances heavy with unspoken communication. As the applause continued and Alisara took her bows, I reminded myself of the most important truth. I didn't deserve hope. Not here. Not with her. And so I told myself, don't hope. Because hope, like emotion, was just another weakness waiting to be danced around by those who knew exactly how to exploit it. Chapter 440. Crimson Dancer, 3. Lucifer watched Alisara dance, and he felt it. That inconvenient thump of the heart, the faint heat rising in his cheeks, the unmistakable signs of biological betrayal. His brain, the allegedly rational one, tried to chalk it up to aesthetics. She was beautiful, extremely so, but this This felt less like appreciation and more like someone had spiked the air with pheromones. He looked around. Yes, good. It wasn't just him. All around the hall, men and women alike wore expressions usually reserved for private dreams and embarrassing memories. Blushing cheeks, parted lips, eyes fixed as if watching a data stream they couldn't tear away from. Then his gaze met Arthur's. That was when the dance, Alisara, and the rest of the galaxy became secondary. Arthur's blue eyes, no azure, which sounded poetic and therefore more dangerous, locked onto his with a look that could have melted titanium plating. Lucifer flinched. His stomach dropped, mouth dry as Martian dust, and his hand clenched the side of the chair like it was the only thing keeping him from being pulled into a black hole. Danger. Not physical. Not the usual sword point or blaster barrel kind. No, this was the cold, instinctive kind of danger. The kind that made animals run from the forest long before the storm hit. Why? Lucifer thought. Arthur wasn't his enemy. They weren't best friends, but they were friendly. He admired Arthur. Rivaled him, even. A quiet sort of competition. The kind forged through sparring matches, near-death missions, and unspoken mutual respect. But this look was not friendly. This look made Lucifer's skin crawl. Arthur had never looked at him like that before. There had always been camaraderie between them. At least Lucifer had assumed there was. But now Arthur's gaze felt like a diagnostic scan with malicious intent. Cold, calculating, and above all, personal. Lucifer found himself watching Arthur instead of the dancer, which said something, considering Alisara was currently moving like the laws of physics had taken a coffee break. But Arthur's expression, that was the real show. Lucifer prided himself on reading people. Politics, court drama, diplomacy. You don't grow up a prince without learning the art of expression management. Arthur, however, had always been a locked file. Calm, quiet, unreadable. But tonight the encryption cracked. He saw the flicker of recognition. Pain even. Like Arthur was staring at something he'd buried and didn't want dug up again. A memory, maybe. A ghost. Something that had no business being here. And then coldness. A mask so sudden and precise it made Lucifer flinch again. Emotion vanished. Replaced by the kind of composed neutrality you'd expect from a warforged android. She reminds him of someone, Lucifer concluded. It was the only thing that made sense. No one looked like that over a dance. Not unless they were in love or in grief. Or both. It was troubling, to say the least. Arthur had 4 girls orbiting him like personal moons, and all of them were the possessive type. Beautiful, powerful, dangerous, and terrifyingly attentive. If this dance unlocked some kind of old wound, Lucifer knew things were going to go sideways fast. I should help him, Lucifer decided, though part of him sighed as he did. He liked Arthur. Wanted to be closer friends. They'd started to build something during the 2nd year, the kind of bond that wasn't easy to find in a world where friendships often came with agendas. Then came the field trip incident. Possession. Vanishing. A whole year lost. And when Arthur came back, well, the 4 girls formed a human firewall. Getting any time with him was like trying to schedule a meeting with a high-security diplomat during wartime. Too much drama. Lucifer sighed, dragging his gaze away from Arthur, his hand finally relaxing its death grip on the chair. This, right here, was exactly why he was sticking to tradition. One woman, one peaceful life, minimal bloodshed, hopefully. The dance concluded with thunderous applause, and Alisara took a final bow before gliding off the performance area with the same ethereal grace that had characterized her entire routine. The spell she'd cast over the room lingered, hanging in the air like expensive perfume. As if choreographed by the same hand that had directed Alisara's performance, servers appeared from concealed doorways around the grand hall. They moved with synchronized precision, each dressed in traditional Eastern formal attire, flowing robes in deep blue with silver embroidery that caught the light as they walked. Lord Daedric raised his hand, signaling the commencement of the meal. The Southern Sea Sun Palace is honored to present a culinary journey through the Eastern traditions, he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the hall. We begin with the first of 7 courses. The servers approached each table, carrying lacquered trays laden with artfully arranged dishes. Lucifer watched as the first course was placed before him. A small ceramic vessel containing what appeared to be a clear broth, so transparent he could see the delicate pattern painted on the inside of the bowl. Floating within were tiny parcels of something that resembled flower blossoms. Akuan broth with sea lotus dumplings, the server explained, his voice soft and respectful, to cleanse the palate and prepare the senses. Lucifer lifted the small bowl, inhaling the subtle aroma. It wasn't scent as much as it was suggestion. Hints of ocean depths and rare herbs cultivated only on the eastern continent. He sipped carefully, and flavor bloomed across his tongue. Complex, layered, and somehow both familiar and entirely new. Across the table, he noted Arthur's 4 companions reacting to the broth in ways that revealed more about them than perhaps they intended. Rachel attacked hers with characteristic enthusiasm, eyes widening at the flavor explosion. Cecilia sipped with practiced aristocratic precision, though her eyebrows lifted slightly in appreciation. Serafina analyzed each element methodically, as if cataloging the experience for future reference. Rose, the Marquis's daughter, seemed to recognize the preparation, nodding slightly as if confirming something she'd expected. Arthur himself was more focused on his immediate surroundings than the food, his gaze sweeping the room in subtle scanning patterns. Intelligence gathering, Lucifer recognized, while maintaining the appearance of a guest enjoying a formal meal. It was the kind of multitasking that came naturally to someone accustomed to operating in hostile territory. The second course arrived as the first was completed, delicate slices of raw fish arranged like a blooming flower, each piece resting on a small mound of seasoned grain the color of sunrise. Sakana, the server introduced, harvested from the sacred pools beneath Mount Corinne, prepared in the traditional sea-to-blade method. Lucifer had experienced similar cuisine on diplomatic visits, but this was exceptional even by royal standards. The fish, if one could call such a delicacy by so simple a term, practically melted on contact with the tongue, releasing waves of flavor that seemed to tell the story of its origins. The third course arrived, a small, steaming wooden box containing what appeared to be miniature landscapes made entirely of edible components. A mountain of carefully seasoned rice, a forest of microgreens, a river of blue sauce that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. Yama-umi, the server announced, the meeting of mountain and sea. But it was Arthur's occasional glances toward Alisara, now seated at the high table beside Lord Daedric, that most intrigued him. There was something unresolved there, something that went beyond mere attraction or curiosity. The fifth course, a steaming earthenware pot containing a broth so rich it was nearly opaque, with various ingredients arranged in symbolic patterns, arrived just as conversation around the table shifted. The presentation is exquisite, came a calm voice to Lucifer's left. Rinkagu, heir to the most powerful family in the East, examined the dish with practiced familiarity. Though not quite what I'm accustomed to. Different from your homeland's cuisine? Lucifer asked, genuinely curious. Ren's violet eyes reflected the soft light as he nodded. The Southern Sea Sun Palace draws inspiration from the island traditions of the Eastern Archipelago, more focused on the purity of ingredients and seasonal alignment. My family's region emphasizes bold flavors, complex spice blends, and symbolic arrangements. So essentially, the difference between... Lucifer searched for the right comparison. Between meditation and storytelling, Rin supplied. Both are powerful in their own way, but serve different purposes. Ian joined the conversation from across the table, his golden eyes bright with amusement. Ren's just being diplomatic. His family's chefs would consider this beautiful but bland. Not bland, Ren corrected with a slight smile. Subtle. There's a difference. Lucifer appreciated the rare moment of camaraderie with his fellow Class A students. These exchanges had become increasingly uncommon as academic competition intensified and personal entanglements complicated their relationships. Moments like this reminded him of their first year, before rivalries had fully crystallized. Movement near the high table caught his attention. A young woman, No, a girl who couldn't be older than 18, was standing beside Lord Daedric, offering what appeared to be a ceremonial cup. Her red hair was pulled back in a severe style that emphasized her startlingly mature features, and she moved with the fluid grace of someone far older. "Who is that?" Lucifer asked, keeping his voice casual. Ren followed his gaze. "Lord Daedric's daughter, I presume." His tone remained neutral, but the slight tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. Lucifer observed her more carefully. There was something unusual about her mana signature, a controlled intensity that rippled outward in carefully measured waves. Most teenagers, even exceptionally talented ones, lacked such precise regulation. "She's mid-integration rank," he noted with surprise. At their age, reaching such a level was remarkable even among the elite students of Mythos Academy. "Looks like there was a talent in the Southern Sea Sun Palace."